Chapter 40. Chiron had a frown on his face as he overlooked the fields of the camp. It had been quite a few days since the notice board had appeared in camp and startled everyone. Now, though, it had become a sort of normalcy. In a world of gods and monsters, it was a small detour when it came to strangeness. The campers were nothing if not adaptable. Unfortunately, he felt like he didn't have that same mindset. These past few weeks had been challenging. More challenging than he could recall in the past several decades. He wouldn't quite call it the same level as when the big war was happening, but it was getting close. So far, 4 teams have left camp. 4 teams of 5 demigods. Apollo managed to force out some semblance of a prophecy. Well, more like a general idea of what to do. Chiron heard the rumors that Hera was being aggressive in her demands of him, and he put all of his effort into forcing something out to placate her. Journey west to find what was stolen. That was all that had to go by. But it seemed enough, for now. Prophecies had a way of fulfilling themselves. By sending a bunch of groups out west, inevitably it would be completed, at least that was the thought of many of the gods. Chiron was wary of it, but his campers had a fire lit under them. Never before had the gods shown such enthusiasm towards them going on a quest. Never before had the gods opened the proverbial doors and told them to get going en masse like this. Many of them were treating it as a competition, seeing who could reach the west coast first. He couldn't blame them, they were essentially raised and trained for this. For many of them, it was like they were finally handed their purpose, a path for recognition from their godly parents. And the promises of riches and rewards certainly didn't help. Despite a good percentage of his campers being gone, the camp was still as rowdy and loud as normal. Part of that was the fervor that everyone was training with. The other part was, well, the additions they had just received. Chiron was given the background of the new campers that were dumped into his lap. The dozen or so children of various ages that had abruptly just been dropped here. He knew the legends of the Lotus Eaters, it was a cautionary tale in one of the most famous stories in the world. What he didn't know was that they had a casino in Las Vegas that they used to trap demigods in and had a separate flow of time. So now there were a dozen demigods from different points in the last 100 or so years that he now had to mentor. That and they were lined up in perfect sync in the middle of the training fields, swinging their swords, screaming about a celestial sword, or something. He was confused about that part. Therefore, Chiron had a brilliant idea. A couple of days ago, he had put his own request up on the board. If a certain person was responsible for them abruptly reappearing in the world, then a certain person could also help with. Was training the right word? Handling. With handling them. Apparently, it was accepted. So he had been waiting. Hey, Chiron. Lord Hermes came flying down, landing next to him. Got new marching orders for you from Pops. He said, handing me a letter. They want another 2 teams heading out by the end of the week. He felt his eye twitch. We're getting low on children old enough to go on quests. Hermes shrugged helplessly. You're welcome to tell Pops what you think. But I don't think you should worry, he's mostly doing this to placate Mom. I don't think he's going to force the really young kids to go running across the country. He could only hope. Did you come to check on your son? Chiron asked. Hermes seemed to just stare blankly for a moment. Nah, he's doing fine, right? Pan is old enough to take care of himself, he doesn't need me to baby him. If that's what you desire. Chiron said helplessly. What was he supposed to do? Tell one of the Olympians to go check in with his godly child. Hermes was fully aware that Pan was basically hanging on by a thread, but he didn't seem to put much emphasis on it. He's being taken care of by the Council of Satyrs right now, if you want to stop by. Hermes just nodded absent-mindedly. Chiron smiled awkwardly, it was already the best he could do in this situation. Someone's coming. Hermes tilted his head up towards the sky. Normally I would be alarmed, but with both the barrier in place and Harms being casual about it, I was more interested than worried. Was that a cloud? There was someone riding a cloud. Who? Chiron was about to ask, but he was interrupted as a voice carried over the area. My furnace once burned beneath Crete's stone skin. Sages seek enlightenment in stars. I built a staircase instead. The winds may forget my name. But my gears will outlast time. I am Daedalus. My Tao is design. The ancient demigod leapt off the cloud, landing gracefully in front of everyone. The entire field had stopped what they were doing to stare. Even Hermes stared at him strangely. Nice poem. Hermes started to float away. Seems like you're busy with something. I'll see you later, Chiron. The god of travels abruptly disappeared. Perhaps even he felt the secondhand embarrassment. Chiron looked at the departing god, then back at Daedalus. Quote. It's been a while. Hello, Chiron. Daedalus greeted him for the first time in centuries. I didn't know you were still alive. The centaur admitted. I hid in the labyrinth for a long time. Chiron nodded, knowing that made a lot of sense. Quote. Why? Please don't ask. Daedalus cut him off, knowing he was going to ask about his introduction. It's part of my job. That is to say, Ocean Song told them all that it's mandatory for them to all have a proper poem ready when they introduce themselves. He cited it as something real cultivators do, and thus they must do it as well. Chiron just nodded awkwardly. Quote. 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 I had to, alright. Daedalus leaned it. It's watching, I know it is. He whispered. Okay. Chiron responded hesitantly before clearing his throat. It's good to see you, Daedalus. The weird atmosphere eased slightly, and Daedalus found himself smiling back. It's good to see you too, Chiron. Despite the fact that Daedalus had been exiled, for lack of a better word. Chiron was genuinely happy to see him alive and doing well. Chiron hadn't taught him for many years as a child, more a passerby in the old demigod's life, but it didn't matter much. The faces from long ago were few and far between. Have you been well? Chiron asked. About as well as I could be. Daedalus admitted, pointing to himself. Considering. Chiron gave him a once-over, noting the strange-looking robes he now wore. How exactly did you end up in this spot? Sure, let's go with that. Daedalus sighed. I lost a bet to a stupid Cyclops. Chiron nodded, not asking for further details. That about answered all the questions he had at this point in time about his situation. I hope you at least aren't miserable. Admittedly, there are certain benefits. Daedalus grunted, forcing himself to even admit that much. However, I feel I lose part of my sanity every day. Chiron gently put a hand on his old acquaintance's shoulder. That being said, Daedalus pulled a bundle of papers out of his robes. I need you to sign the paperwork before I get started. I just need you to acknowledge that I arrived and that I will begin working as outlined in the request you submitted. Oh, alright. Chiron accepted them, somewhat happy that this was less strange than he had feared. Paperwork was something he was familiar with and could handle. Thank you. Daedalus accepted the papers back. I should warn you, these children aren't what you would probably expect. I know you have some experience teaching, but, Chiron paused. Perhaps you should take a few moments to watch them first to get a better idea of what you're working with. Daedalus took one glance at the strangest batch of demigods he'd ever worked with and let out a long sigh. No need, I'm prepared already. What do you? Daedalus pulled out his sword and shouted. With a celestial sword, I can go to the heavens and enter the netherworld. Chiron, startled, took a step back. To his utter confusion, the children looked his way, raised their swords, and shouted back in unison. I'm in control of my destiny, not fate. Chiron took one look at it and then turned to walk away. I don't even know what's going on anymore. He muttered to himself, shaking his head. He suddenly felt like an old man who couldn't understand the new hip trends amongst the kids. Hey, teach. Chiron perked up, seeing Percy running at him, smiling warmly. Percy, what can I do for you? Is it okay if I make a team to head out? I heard that we just have to run it by you. Chiron's smile faltered slightly. You're still relatively new here, Percy. Are you sure you're prepared to go on your own quest? Truthfully, he couldn't stop them in this case. Orders from high up. If they wanted to go, they could go. So Chiron was choosing his words carefully in an attempt to make them self-doubt, or at least make a more rational decision. Yeah, I think I'm ready. Chiron sighed in his heart. You need at least a group of 5. That was the only concession he got out of the gods. That each group needed at least 5 to increase their chances of survival. It was hard for them to argue with that. Yeah, I got me, Malcolm, Grover. Percy furrowed his brow. Can't we just go with us 3? Sorry, Percy, those are the rules. Chiron shook his head. Percy grumbled. I guess I could find 2 more. Malcolm says he has a sister that's pretty smart. Do you know anyone else, Mr. Branner? You don't have to call me by that name, Percy. Chiron still smiled warmly at him. However, I do have a suggestion. I believe that Luke Castellan hasn't left yet. Percy scrunched his nose. The harpy guy. Chiron's eye twitched. Percy, it's not good to judge people based on rumors. He woke up naked with a harpy. Percy countered. Don't judge people too harshly, Percy. Chiron found it hard to defend Luke in this instance. Regardless, he's the head of the Hermes cabin and one of the best in camp when it comes to combat. And his skills as a thief are second to none among his siblings. Alright, I guess I'll go ask. Thanks, Teach. Percy cheerfully waved goodbye and ran off. Chiron shook his head one last time. He just hoped all the kids would come back safely. Line break. Ocean Song clasped his hands behind his back. The majority of the sect were off on their own missions. That is to say, Ocean Song had forced them into manual labor to earn money for the sect. Like a proper cultivator, he turned to questionable labor practices at the expense of those under him to turn a profit. Fellow Taoist, how have you enjoyed your time here thus far? Ocean Song walked into the back rooms of the sect's main hall. The newest member of their sect, Mel, was currently in the kitchen. She perked up on his arrival. Oh, it's been fun. She smiled politely. Your pet has been teaching me how to cook. Bahu. Nessie nodded its big head, standing behind Mel, apparently giving her pointers. A great many questions would perhaps be asked by anyone else. However, Ocean Song was a cultivator, thus, he didn't see anything wrong with what was going on. I hope the sect has been to your liking. Mel smiled again. It's been a nice vacation. The hot springs have been lovely, and the mountain setting has been very peaceful. Thank you for letting me come. I didn't realize how much I needed to get away for a bit. Ocean Song nodded. You're welcome to stay as long as you want. The doors to the sect are always open to you, fellow Taoist. He didn't actually expect her to become a sect member. But if a friendly god just happened to be around if things went wrong, well, isn't that just good fortune? Ocean Song pondered if he should open the sect as a mountain resort for gods that need a vacation. It would almost assuredly provide a safety net in case of something bad happening. This one merely stopped by to tell you that I will be heading out for a period. If you require assistance, please ask anyone, including the Great Void Sect protecting Divine Beast, for help. He stated. It's fine, I don't need someone catering to my every whim. She waved it off. Ocean Song nodded before stepping out. As soon as he headed outside, he threw his sword out and stepped onto it, shooting off into the sky. As a nascent soul realm cultivator, he was magnitudes faster than when at core formation. Fast enough that in a tenth of the time previously, he had already arrived at the entrance to the underworld. He didn't even need to show his token as he entered. The guards, the employees of his revered uncle, just waved him past the lines of souls that were waiting to enter the afterlife. Truly, he has been given much face. He continued to soar through the underworld until he found what he was looking for. He touched down onto the ground, putting his sword away. He took out a mirror, making sure his hair wasn't messy and his clothing was well kept. Taking a deep breath, he walked up to the door of the house and knocked on it. He smiled as it opened, the goddess Hecate standing at the threshold. Ahem, I was, in the neighborhood, and I perhaps thought it would not be impolite to come visit. Hecate raised an eyebrow, her expression not changing. Silently, she stepped to the side, gesturing for him to enter. Great goddess. She narrowed her eyes. Hecate. She nodded in approval. Hecate. Ocean Song cleared his throat again. I have been practicing the Tao of Talismans, and I have made some progress. I wish for you to review it, if you're willing. Ocean Song held out one talisman in particular. You've been practicing your magic. Her interest was immediately piqued. She wasn't a goddess of magic for no reason. Yes, this talisman is what I've been working hard on for the past few days. Please. He gestured for her to use it. Hecate could analyze it by sight alone, but seeing as he wanted her to use it, she was willing to abide. It didn't take much effort on her end to activate it at all, as the mechanism was rather simple. The talisman lit up and then burst into flames, something else appearing in her hands. It was a bouquet of flowers that replaced the talisman. Instead of being an actual bundle of flowers, each piece of it was made of magic. She held the magical bouquet of flowers and looked at the Cyclops smiling at her, looking very proud of himself. To her own dismay, she realized she found herself blushing a little. Line break. One particular trope is that some famous immortals will introduce themselves with a poem when they arrive in certain scenarios. Ocean Song decided that they were going to do that too from now on. If you want to read one chapter ahead or support me, visit my page AStoryForOne. I also have a boosty if you can't use the above under the same name. 71 comments 0 vote. Chapter 41. Hecate crossed her arms. Persephone was standing next to her with the most smug look on her face. She was holding the magical bouquet of flowers, looking it over while shooting Hecate a certain look every now and then. Oh, he really got you good, didn't he? The queen of the underworld stated. Quote, quote. Should I check for purple lipstick on his face? She asked with a grin. Quote, quote. Or maybe, it's somewhere else. Shut up. Hecate finally huffed before grabbing it back out of her hand. Did you come here just to say this? No, it's just a bonus. Persephone laughed. But there is something serious to talk about. My husband just found out that all the kids from the camp have started mobilizing. Hecate raised an eyebrow. What do you mean mobilizing? You've been distracted, so you probably haven't heard everything that's been happening up top lately. I've heard enough. Hecate crossed her arms. Other pantheons had come to Olympus. Persephone nodded. Yes, that was a big commotion. And it's understandable that you stepped back after hearing that. It would have been unwise to poke your head out while that was happening. But recently, someone stole Hera's golden apple tree. Hecate looked away. What sort of idiot would do something like that? Of course, she knew the actual answer to that question, and he was sitting in the other room. Persephone shrugged. Regardless, Hera has been upset. To calm her, they've been sending groups of demigods out to search for it. From what I know, Mother said that Apollo was able to force out something about them needing to head west. What about Zeus's lightning bolt? Persephone casually waved dismissively. I was just giving you a heads up because your kids weren't excluded either. Hecate pursed her lips. My children aren't usually so active compared to the others there. Persephone sighed helplessly. Not everyone is being given a chance. With how little information they had to go on, a lot of your kids were being pressured to join in. Demigods well versed in magic are pretty indispensable right now. There was a flash of anger in Hecate's eyes, but there wasn't much she could say. Beyond actually being forced, she couldn't actually step in to say something. Isn't your youngest over in California right now? It's a good time to coordinate with some of your kids to bring her back to camp. Hecate understood what she was saying. Her youngest daughter, 8 years old, recently having been sent to an orphanage after her father passed away. She had yet to have a chance to coordinate her safe retrieval and only had the chance to bend the rules in setting up magical barriers around the orphanage she was staying in. Hecate had already been doing a lot more than she really should be to keep her safe. The occasional monster that gets too close has mysteriously disappeared. Or you could just have your new big strong boy toy go and rescue her, Persephone cooed. Hecate rolled her eyes. She knew that the lady of the underworld was just saying that to get under her skin in a non-provocative way. However, she did have a point. I would have normally been against him retrieving her unless it were an absolute emergency. Really? It seems like the easy answer. Easy, yes. And then people ask questions like how I even know him well enough to ask him that. She countered. Everyone knows how protective I am of my children, it's not like I would just throw up a quest for him to go fetch her. True. She nodded. He is a hot potato right now, for certain reasons. But if you say that everyone's so heavily distracted, then we can play a little fast with it. Hecate added. Well, it's up to you. Persephone shrugged again. I just wanted to come over and warn you. And take a moment to tease you. Hecate rolled her eyes as the queen disappeared back to her own corner of the underworld. The goddess of magic returned to the main room of her house to see Ocean Song sitting down meditating. Slightly, she found herself smiling again. Carefully, she put her magical flowers away. She looked at him again and fixed her expression. I would like to make a request. Sure. Ocean Song stood up. Hecate let out a sigh. You should at least listen to what I ask first. Who knows if you just agreed to something disastrous for you. It's okay, I trust you. Ocean Song smiled brightly. Hecate muttered, idiot, under her breath. I have a daughter. As soon as she said that, for some reason, she had an anxious need to follow it up with an explanation. She's 8 years old. She is currently staying at an orphanage, and I wish to bring her to the camp safely. Should I go ahead and get her? Ocean Song asked. Hecate pursed her lips, mostly because she didn't want to show her happiness at how quickly he agreed. Despite her admonishment of the speed at which he agreed, she was genuinely pleased that he trusted her so much. She gave a hesitant nod. I can help you get there relatively easily, but I can't. I can't offer any other help. Nor can I give her anything that she may need. Ocean Song patted his robes, then slapped his storage pouch, dropping a pile of monster trophies onto the ground. Are these worthy of a reward? Hecate blinked, looking at them in confusion. Perhaps a reward that would be beneficial for a young lady, 8 years old. One that is the daughter of a goddess of magic. Of course, it's for my own personal reasons. Ocean Song held his arms behind his back. Truthfully, Hecate wasn't taken aback by the kind act on his part. Not to say she wasn't moved, and that she briefly considered what Persephone said earlier about leaving some lipstick marks. No, her silence was because she hadn't even thought about using him as an intermediary to deliver needed things to her children. It seemed rather obvious in hindsight, but she was so used to playing by the rules or doing her best to not completely walk over them but still do as much as she could. Frankly, no gods really used intermediaries to get what they needed to their children. It sort of went against the spirit of the rules, if not the letter. Though, that might be mostly because a lot of the gods don't care that much about their kids. That, and a lot of them don't have someone they could trust completely like Ocean Song, yet he is still powerful and willing to do menial tasks like this without any reward or demands on his end. She's already aware of most things, even if she's very young still. I've been tutoring her, in her dream. The goddess calmed herself. Let me tell you what you need to know. Line break. Ocean Song was unceremoniously spat out of a swirling door of shadows. It was a rather common occurrence these days. He stood up, brushing himself off as he read the letters overhead the building he now stood in front of. Some type of orphanage, he didn't know the actual name because part of the signage was damaged and only the orphanage part was legible. This place did not invoke Ocean Song with the best feeling. However, sniffing a few times, he realized that this place smelled off. As his monster senses weren't picking up any demigod nearby. He briefly wondered if it was a similar situation to Gabe and Percy. Otherwise, he didn't believe that Hecate would leave her daughter in a rundown dump like this. He whistles to himself as he goes inside, noticing he passed over a magical boundary. He was about to knock on the door, but a gust of wind opened it, the hinges squeaking. The Cyclops shrugged as he stepped inside, though he paused as soon as he passed the threshold and looked up. The magical effects around the place dissipated. Hecate warned him about this, a happenstance of the spellage she used. That he, as a monster, passing the threshold would disrupt the spell due to a paradox in the design. It didn't account for a friendly monster to be allowed past. His nose twitched again, and the smell of demigod became much more intense. Ocean Song just sighed in his heart, knowing that the heavens are fair. Since Hecate went against the heavenly mandate, then there must be a punishment. That is, the scent of her daughter had been intensified enough that it reached dozens of blocks in all directions. There were quite a few monsters nearby in a city this large. He ignored it and walked inside. The insides, of course, were just as expected when considering the outsides. Excuse me, children. There were a couple kids playing with some weathered toys near the entrance. They seemed surprised that he was there. I'm looking for a young lady by the name of Lyra. Do you know where she is? The two boys looked at each other. $5. Ocean Song's eye twitched, but he didn't try to argue. He flicked his wrist and produced the money. Rather quickly, the two boys grabbed the money out of his hand and began to run away. The freak is out back by herself. One of them shouted as they disappeared into the corridors. He could only shrug helplessly at the kids. He couldn't fault them. It must be difficult to survive in a place like this. As for, out back, he did see some doors leading to the back of the building, a big open space at least. And he certainly saw a little lady playing with a couple handmade dolls by herself. Carefully, he walked outside so as not to create a commotion. She noticed him, staring at him unblinkingly, like one would at a puzzle. He didn't immediately approach her. He could tell she was spooked, that she could see past all the mist illusions around him, and that she could see that he wasn't human. Demigod children were often smarter than children should be at the same age. It wasn't a monopoly that Athena's children had on being smart. Hecate's children just as well often had intelligence to match. Instead, Ocean Song casually lay on his side and took out a talisman. He waved it around, and the sand floated up and reshaped into a snowman-like figure. He grabbed a couple twigs within reach and a few stones, and he began to decorate it. She stared at him in amazement. Seemingly, the previous caution had disappeared into wonder. She looked up at him again, sheepish as if she got caught staring when she wasn't supposed to, but he merely gave her a little wink. Ocean Song used the same talisman, an earth-control talisman, to create a small bird made of sand. It flapped its wings as it flew through the air, doing some tricks before flying towards the young girl. It did a loop around her before landing in her hands. She let out a sharp squeak of surprise as it turned back into dirt as soon as she grabbed it. Finally, it seemed like all her trepidation disappeared at that point. With her dolls in hand, she started to inch closer to him until she got close enough that he could grab her if he wanted. You must be Lyra. You have your mother's eyes. Ocean Song spoke softly. The little girl hugged her dolls closely and didn't immediately respond, but Ocean Song wasn't annoyed in the slightest. Your mom sent me here to take you somewhere nice and safe. He continued, giving her time to familiarize herself with his presence. Mommy. She whispered. There were another few moments of silence. The little girl squatted down, looking at the snowman that was actually made of dirt. Quote. Can you make more birds? She said very quietly. Magic birds. Ocean Song's lips twitch in amusement. Do you want to see more birds? He shifted his posture. How about you make the birds for me? He handed her the talisman. She took it hesitantly and looked it over. As young as she was, she didn't really understand much here, and she sort of just waved it around. Funnily enough, that was doing something. A daughter of Hecate had magic in her blood, quite literally. Even without proper training, she sort of activated it. The dirt was jumping up and down, and it almost formed into a shape, but it didn't quite get there. Frankly, he would call her a genius. Instead of being excited, she looked like she wanted to cry. I'm stupid. Hey. Ocean Song quickly cut in. It's all right, it just takes practice. No, I'm stupid. Everyone says so. Stupid, stupid, stupid. Even mommy thinks I'm stupid. Your mom doesn't think you're stupid. He tried to gently coax her out of her tantrum. Mommy has to keep saying everything over and over in my dreams. Everyone says that I'm stupid because they need to say things a lot to me to know it. Can you hold this rock for me? Ocean Song picked one up off the ground, dropping it in her hand. It got her to stop nearly crying, mostly because she was confused as to what he was doing. Tell me something, you have one rock. How many rocks would you have if I added another into your hand? He dropped the second into her open hand. 2 rocks. She tilted her head. He nodded. He then scooped out a pile of dirt and put it into her other hand. You have a pile of dirt now. If I give you another pile of dirt to add to it, how many piles of dirt do you have? The little girl stood there for several moments. 1 pile of dirt, she answered, but she sounded very unsure and embarrassed. Ocean Song's smile grew big. How come? Because if I had 1 pile of dirt, another pile of dirt would just make it bigger, and there wouldn't be 2. That's right. Ocean Song nodded. See, you are smart. Some people just learn things differently. He knew for a fact she wasn't stupid. A stupid person wouldn't be able to utilize his talisman literally after just touching it for the first time. I'm not. Why not? That was an easy question. She whispered. Everyone would have said that. She dropped the sand and rocks onto the ground. Oh yeah, Ocean Song responded, using a certain tone to engage her competitiveness. It was a silly question, but it was one meant for kids to build critical thinking. Specifically, it was not an easy question for children her age to get so quickly. Then why don't you go ask someone else inside? I'll make you a deal. If a single kid inside answers it correctly, I'll take you out for ice cream. Her eyes lit up. You promise? I super promise. Ocean Song nodded. Despite trying to prove herself stupid, she quickly ran inside to win the bet between them. He had a warm smile as he watched her disappear inside, but it quickly faded as he hopped onto the roof of the building and looked outward. Hands behind his back, robes billowing, he opened his mouth to speak, and it reached the ears of every monster in the vicinity. Fellow Taoists, please give me some face, this area is off limits. There were a few that stopped, many that hesitated, but the vast majority weren't deterred. It seems my reputation has not reached this far. He said softly, holding his hand out, his sword flying out of his storage pouch into his grip. This one's name is Ocean Song, please remember it for the next time you walk this world. Hundreds of sword lights flash out, each one meticulously hitting all the monsters converging on this building. There wasn't any notable monster in the bunch, just a bunch of trash in his eyes. But it was enough to send a message. He didn't expect his name to be known this far west, but as a proper cultivator, he had to be domineering when the opportunity presented itself. Very quickly, he hopped back down, just as the door opened again and Lyra came running out. Ocean Song regained his early smile. So, how did it go? She tried her best to look upset, arms crossed and pouting, but a bit of a smile kept bleeding through. Despite Losing the best and missing out on the chance at ice cream, it was clear that she was happy. Ocean Song held out his hand. Come on, let's go pack your stuff up, and then we can get some ice cream before leaving. Line break. A.N. Hecate finds out that Ocean Song is good with her children. Hecate considers how good he will be with her future children. If you want to read one chapter ahead or support me, visit my page AStoryForOne. AStoryForOne. I also have a boosty if you can't use the above under the same name. 77 comments 0 vote. Chapter 42. Ocean Song frowned. He was worried. He was worried enough that he couldn't even look heroic while he drank from his wine gourd. He was sitting at a table with Lyra, the little girl completely oblivious to the Cyclops' worries. She was much more interested in the large bowl of ice cream that she hadn't even gotten halfway through yet. Ocean Song tried not to show his concern on his face, lest he make the young girl get scared. So, he calmly just took another drink from his wine gourd. Even as he glanced up at the very dark sky, he calmly just drank. His impeccable instincts told him that if he tried to fly upwards, he would be getting more than a face full of lightning. The dark clouds stretched far off onto the horizon. They had come out of nowhere with surprising speed and aggressiveness. Yet, contrary to the looming threat overhead, not a single crackle of thunder was heard, nor a single raindrop fell down. Truthfully, it just made it all the more ominous. His divine sense swept out going north, to see if there was a path around this storm. However, his divine sense locked onto something that also noticed him. Several serpentine heads opened their eyes, as if watching him. Ocean Song had killed a lot of monsters at this point. The vast majority of them had been nothing more than cannon fodder. Even the Minotaur, perhaps the most famous monster he'd killed thus far, wasn't particularly strong. However, from those many eyes that looked back at him, Ocean Song felt a tingle down his spine. Strong. Very strong. He also felt the creeping sense of death, as if it was waiting for him there. Of course, what else would one expect from a monster that even gods fear? With poison so potent that even immortals would wish for death. It didn't move, it was lying down in some deserted area far north, its eyes only half opened as if watching and waiting for prey to make a move. Ocean Song had a feeling that if he tried to go north, it would go after him. He pulled his divine sense back, then looked south for a long way until he found something else that gave him a fright. There was an obese woman sitting at a cafe with a dog at her side. As soon as Ocean Song's divine sense swept over her, out of the corner of her eye, she looked back at him. The mother of monsters barely spared him a glance, the manticore masquerading as a dog only half opened its eyes, and seeing that its owner didn't make a move, it went back to sleep. However, once more, Ocean Song felt like she was just simply waiting. He pulled his divine sense back again. Then, he shot it out west, towards the ocean. It didn't even make it to the water before he hastily pulled it back because there was something large and deadly sitting beneath the waves. Normally, the ocean's tides would be a welcomed and warm home for him. However, there was only the sense of impending death if he continued that way. He then looked out east, and it was as if nothing was there, a clear and peaceful route, home. It only made Ocean Song frown deeper, taking another drink from his gourd. Ocean Song was many things, but he wasn't stupid, most of the time. He knew a trap when he saw one, and he knew that he had been caged in. He didn't know how it happened, only that the proverbial walls fell down all at once and he didn't have time to react. Something or someone was guiding him to make a very specific move. And it all compounded in the fact that none of his attempts to contact Hecate or other gods had worked. And he realized that he couldn't contact his fellow sect members. Not because something was cutting off communication there too, but because he realized none of them had phones. Truly, it was an oversight on his part. He would have to set up a sect phone plan when he got back. The last nail in the proverbial coffin was the fact that any illusions he tried to weave through use of the mists were dispersed. Anything beyond hiding his own inhuman nature, it was like they wouldn't take effect in the world. It was unsettling, to say the least. He simply couldn't do whatever he wanted now and forego any mundane consequences. Ocean Song gave himself a few light slaps on the cheeks for encouragement and reinvigoration. If the path ahead was filled with fire and ice, then so be it. It was foolish to walk into a known danger, but if he was forced onto a dangerous road, then his sword would clear the way. His main priority right now was to get Lyra to safety. Mr. Ocean, I'm all done. Lyra set her spoon to the side. Ocean Song just smiled. Are you sure? Do you want something else? I think my tummy is going to explode if I eat any more. She laughed sincerely before looking up. Is it going to rain, Mr. Ocean? Ocean Song took a glance upwards as well, at the foreboding dark clouds blanketing the sky. I sure hope it doesn't, he said, standing up. Are you ready to go? He held out his hand. The young girl hopped off her seat, picking up her colorful and sticker-covered backpack. It held all her things inside. Suffice to say, it was larger on the inside than should be logically possible. One of the few direct gifts that her mother had snuck her way, technically breaking a few rules. She nodded happily, taking his hand as they began to walk down the street. They weren't far away from where they needed to go. There was a bus station that made cross-country trips. Plenty of buses that went from California to the East Coast and back every day. Despite never having been to a train station in this life, Ocean Song wasn't flustered. He had plenty of experience to fall back on from his time before. Though he didn't particularly like the idea of traveling by bus, he couldn't very well walk the entire way with a young lady at his side. She most likely wouldn't make it a few miles, and it would just be ridiculous for Ocean Song to push her to do something like that. However, once inside, there was a monitor overhead that showed bus routes and buses that were sold out. He frowned again because it was just too obviously far this time. The only bus available until the next morning was a bus that ran right back to New York. Of course, Ocean Song wasn't oblivious to other options. Go rent a car, pay a driver, or even steal a car and drive away. However, he had an inkling that it didn't matter what method of transportation he took, he would be forced along this predetermined route. He felt like a rat trapped in a maze with someone overhead ready to nudge him, forcibly if needed, onto the correct path if he tried to stray. Ocean Song put his gourd up to his lips again, staring at the monitor before walking towards one of the automatic kiosks that accepted money. He printed out 2 tickets for him and Lyra, the younger girl still having no idea about his turbulent thoughts. And Ocean Song had no time to dwell on it either because the bus was departing within minutes. If he were alone, he may have done his best to flip the board. Like cutting in half the bus that they were walking to. Though, to be honest, if Ocean Song were alone, he would have already flown at one of the monsters keeping their distance. His Tao heart wasn't so fragile that he would be scared of losing against such impressive foes. But his Tao heart wouldn't allow him to be scared of fighting. However, there was a difference between running away in fear and running away because you fear for someone else. Just as they were walking to the bus, Lyra squeezed his hand, pointing up. Look, that birdie has tickets in its mouth. She giggled. Ocean Song followed her gaze towards another bus. A raven was sitting on the back edge, with 2 tickets in its mouth. It dropped them, letting out a caw, and then flying away. Ocean Song watched it fly away for a moment, his lips curling up as he walked over and picked up the tickets. They were for the bus that the raven had stood on. Ocean Song read the tickets, and they were also for New York, but they were taking a completely different route. Let's go, Lyra. Ocean Song smiled, leading her to the new bus. Line break. Elsewhere, high above the mundane world, the fates looked down upon the threads. It was rare for them to take such overt actions. But dire times called for dire actions, as it were. If they couldn't cut a thread, then they could isolate its effect on other important threads, let it somewhere else, or even try to have its owner killed through other means, thereby solving the problem entirely. Everything was meticulously planned. From the budding romance they witnessed between the goddess and monster to the child of the goddess needing rescue. Every action, every movement across the mortal continent, they watched carefully and maneuvered their pieces into place. They had dozens of different contingencies ready for whatever actions he took. If he wanted to run headfirst into the Hydra or the mother of monsters, so be it. It would save them a lot of trouble. But there were also certain rules that had to be acknowledged even for the fates. The 3 old women scowled together. Things could be moved into place ahead of time, they could set up all the chess pieces they needed. However, once the game began, they couldn't interfere any longer, they had already made all the moves they were allowed. They couldn't add any more dominoes after they started falling over. Who? One of the 3 old women shouted. It was him. Another added. You bastard, you broke the rules. The third shouted, her voice reverberating with the other 2. A chuckle permeated the world around them, a mocking laugh from an old man. Their eyes tore through the void and swept across the world, landing on the old man in question. Over in Los Angeles, not far away from a certain bus station, an old man was sitting at a bench, tossing out birdseed to a bunch of pigeons. No one walking by noticed the two ravens that landed on either of his shoulders. He had a rather conspicuous eye patch over one of his eyes. This is an explicit violation of the rules. Clotho pointed at him. You overstep, Asgardian. We demand punishment. The other two spoke just as quickly. The one-eyed old man barely looked up, just smiled lightly. I'm just repaying a small debt I incurred. It's completely within the rules. Are you telling me that I'm not allowed to buy a young man some bus tickets to pay him back for helping this old man's niece? Nonsense. You know exactly what you did. You altered the fate we created. Maybe you shouldn't have set up such flimsy fates, He shot back. It's terribly crass to have to scheme so overtly, don't you think? I'm just offended by looking at it. The three sisters scowled deeper, their anger nearly boiling over. Do you think this will change anything? Anthropos asked him with anger in her voice. Either way, death will await him, and the threads will return to normal in time. Who knows? The man admitted. But at the very least, I don't like such pathetic scripts. Don't you think it's more exciting when you let someone else write some lines into it? He smiled. The three sisters scoffed indignantly and turned their gaze away, not bothering with him anymore. They knew that arguing was pointless, and fighting was completely off the table. Even at their most arrogant, they didn't want to fight Odin. There was no victory to be had if they engaged that god in battle. The most frightening thing about him wasn't his strength, it was that even if they won, he would make sure they lost. I never did like those old crones. A new voice spoke next to Odin. Another man, well-dressed but nothing ostentatious. He was clean and well-kept without very many defining features other than his deep green eyes. Odin grunted. All that power, and they use it for what? Exhaust themselves by meticulously plotting the course of so many unimportant fates just so their little story plays out exactly how they want. He continued. Bah, I'm already at my wit's end planning one single Ragnarok. I couldn't imagine doing it for all of eternity. Loki. Odin named the person who had joined him. How are you? Oh, you know, suffering excruciating pain, wishing for death, blah blah. He waved his hand flippantly. So, that Cyclops is one of your new pieces. I admit, it took me by surprise. He's certainly an odd one. Odd is good. Odin replied curtly. There's nothing wrong with odd. Loki said politely. Merely an observation. I wouldn't want to insult someone who did my daughter such a favor out of merely goodwill. He smiled warmly despite the tension between the two of them. He ruined some of your plans. Odin pointed out. That he did. It happens, I can't have everything go my way. My current punishment is proof of that. There was a beat of silence between the two as they just casually looked at the birds eating the seed on the ground. Loki reached over, and Odin tilted the bag of seed for him to get a handful and toss it out. It's insulting. Loki spoke up again. I'm offended by association. All it took to get them that angry was one outside factor meddling. If I couldn't account for a few outside factors poking around in my plots, I would have hung up my cape years ago. Odin nodded. You were set back by a bit now, though. Hel being outside of her realm and no longer obsessing over Balder is rather annoying, isn't it? Certainly. Loki let out a sigh. But it is what it is. What should happen will happen eventually. There's no use crying over spilled milk. On the bright side, my daughter is enjoying herself, and she has a chance to find someone who appreciates her. As a father, how could I not be happy about that? What should happen will happen. Odin repeated. I don't like those words. I know you wouldn't. Loki didn't argue. You think you're right, and I think I'm right, that's how it's always been. Our fight has never been about proving who was wrong, it was always about who was more right. Loki stood up, straightening his clothes. Well, I suppose I'll get back to my punishment. I'm sure that egregiously large serpent is missing me and has some particularly nasty venom to drip onto me already. I'll keep an eye on that odd Cyclops, he seems rather interesting. He disappeared with a hazy flash, leaving Odin all alone. Though, the old one-eyed god just grinned as he continued to watch the show. Line break. A.N. Hey guys, just a heads up for those of you who don't know, I've been in the hospital and I'm currently recovering from surgery. I had someone bring my laptop and I felt well enough to write a bit so I pumped another chapter out. PJO, funnily enough, has the Shanja trope of the high-level cultivators, playing chess with everyone in the world. If the fates couldn't cut his thread, then they could put all the pieces into place to force him in the direction they wanted. Either away from their plot, or to certain death. Odin, though, took exception to that and just ever so slightly pushed that intended course off a bit. Essentially, the Fates are doing their best to make sure the cannon train sticks to the rails for the proper story, and since Ocean Song is causing problems, they're trying to push him out of the way or off the tracks completely. Chapter 43. So, we probably should have asked this question before we started. But are you even old enough to drive? Percy asked, looking out the window. He glanced at Luke, who was driving the car they were in. I know how to drive, Luke said casually. I've had to steal a lot of cars before. Alrighty then. Percy decided not to dwell on that second party. Truthfully, it was probably a question that Percy should have asked several states ago. However, every time it was almost brought up by him, it was sort of ignored. It was only now that he said something because he looked out the back window and saw the disappearing body of a monster that Luke had just run over. Percy just shrugged. It's not as hard as driving a chariot, Grover offered. I drove mine into a wall. Percy frowned. Chiron said I wasn't allowed to drive another chariot until I at least get my driver's license first. He decided that regardless, it was probably better than what he could do. Hey Annabeth, what exit am I taking? Luke asked. Annabeth took out a map, looking over it. Take this one up on the right, then we're going south through Kansas City, and then it's a straight shot to Denver. Wouldn't it be faster to keep on this road? He asked. Annabeth shook her head. Someone's already taking that way. Chiron said that every group had to take a different route out west. She turned the map for them to see. There were dozens of lines highlighted across the country that showed other routes by other groups that had already left. Guys. Malcolm, who was usually very quiet, suddenly spoke up. He had his head leaned against his hand as his elbow rested against the edge of the window in the back seat opposite of Percy. Shadow on the left. The others were confused at what he was saying. That bird Shadow has been on us for about an hour now. He said again. That got everyone's attention. Should I poke my head out and take a look? Percy offered. No. Luke and Annabeth both said almost immediately. If it thinks we saw it, it might be able to do something like hit the car, then we're screwed. Annabeth explained. We need to take it out before it has the chance to do anything like that. That was the assumption, that it was a monster, of course. But they didn't want to take any chances. They were far out, almost into the middle of nowhere on the highway. It would be a bad place to get stranded. Based on the location of the sun overhead and the time of day, I'd guess that it's about 100 feet above us at about 2 o'clock. Annabeth stated. Whatever we do, we may want to do it quick because those are some nasty storm clouds up ahead. And they're kind of giving me the willies. Percy pointed out. They all could see, in fact, it didn't need pointing out. There was an utterly massive storm ahead that seemed to stretch on in all directions as far as the eye could see. I could put on the winged shoes I have and maybe try to stab it with my speed. Luke offered. But we'd have to stop, and that might spook it enough for it to try and break the car. No way, that's just letting it have a stationary target if it really can destroy our car. Annabeth shook her head. If we get close to water, I could maybe try something. Percy offered. What? What could you do with water? Luke snorted. Are you going to try and splash it from 100 feet up in the air? Percy was about to counter, but Malcolm put a hand on his arm, and Percy bit it back and just grumbled under his breath. The two of them still hadn't fully revealed the full breadth of their abilities. I'll take care of it. Malcolm suddenly offered. The quietest of the four. Before anyone got rejected, he had reached down and pulled out a bow from his bag. Like Percy's pen sword, it was collapsible and easy to store in small spaces. He rolled down the window. Percy, grab my legs, please. Wait, you aren't seriously? Annabeth was about to speak up, but Malcolm suddenly pushed half his body out the window and aimed upwards. Percy was the only one to react in time to grab his legs so he didn't fall out by accident. Malcolm had already nearly determined the position of the bird in his mind, and he just needed to confirm it with his eyes. He wasn't a son of Apollo, but he had watched the children of Apollo practice with their bows. Not that he hadn't practiced himself, but what could someone his age achieve with but a few weeks of bow practice? He did what Ocean Song had taught him, his power surged silently through his body, and his eyes focused unnaturally. It seemed to resonate with his eyes in particular. The gift received from being a child of Athena. To be given a supernatural control over weapons, and likewise, to be able to analyze mid-combat the abilities of opponents, to watch them move and act, and to be able to respond in a way that borders future sight. And lastly, memorization. Being able to acquire the memory of anything of importance and never forget it. His posture and his movements mirrored the best archer in the camp based on his memory. His gifts allowed him to become one with the bow, reaching a synergy that was hard to describe. Lastly, his power allowed him to pull back the celestial bronze bow with strength that betrayed his smaller frame. Despite moving in a car moving at nearly 100 miles per hour. Despite the target also swaying and moving at a similar speed over 100 feet up in the air, the loose arrow found its mark. The bird fell from the sky. Malcolm slid back inside the car, and he was met with silence. What? He asked them, mostly Annabeth and Luke. Are you sure you're not a son of Apollo? Luke asked incredulously, pulling the car over. Annabeth hit his arm. Don't talk bad about our mom, you idiot. She said under her breath. But, that was, impressive, Malcolm. That is to say, Annabeth was utterly astonished that her younger brother had such skill with a bow. She barely knew anything about this brother of hers, only his name, before he and Percy came to ask if she wanted to go on the quest. I haven't seen you practice much around the archery field. Grover added in. I practice on my own. Malcolm said noncommittally, putting the bow away. And it didn't turn to dust, it might still be alive. Quote. I don't think I've heard of one of Athena's children being so talented with a bow before. Grover said under his breath. I practice with every weapon. Malcolm snorted. My blessings mean I'm automatically proficient with any weapon, it's easy to pick one up and get good enough with it. Annabeth blinked because she had never considered that before. She mostly just trained in what she liked and knew, rarely branching out. Well, let's go put that monster out of its misery. Don't want it calling for help and getting even more to start chasing us. Luke got out, and the others followed. It was easy to find where the bird fell because it hadn't moved much. However, once they got there, they realized it wasn't like any monster they'd seen before. In fact, it didn't even look like a monster. Maybe it was a bit bigger than normal, but it looked like a normal raven. And it was most assuredly still alive. I only clipped its wing. It turned right at the last moment. Malcolm muttered under his breath, noticing one feather in its wing was missing, where it got clipped slightly. The raven pushed itself upright and looked at them, cawing a few times, but otherwise, didn't show any real hostilities. I don't recall any raven bird monsters off the top of my head. Grover scratched his head in confusion. What about you guys? I don't recall any either. Annabeth shook her head. Is it even a monster? Percy asked. Let's just kill it anyways. Luke suggested. Do we really want to take that risk? What if there are more, and it causes a big commotion when it goes back to wherever it came from? He held up a celestial bronze sword over its head. No, wait. Percy stopped him. Let's take him with us. You can't be serious, Percy. Grover spoke up. Though, before anyone could stop him, Percy knelt down and offered an arm out, and without hesitation, the raven hopped across the ground and jumped up onto his arm before moving up to his shoulder. They looked at it incredulously again as it perched happily on his shoulder and cawed several times before settling into the spot. See. He's a good bird. I'm going to name him Greg. Percy rubbed the bird on the head much to its happiness. Luke sighed, putting his sword away. Can't really kill it now that it has a name. He said in defeat. So far, it was the most exciting thing to happen to them since their little trip. Yet, it turned out to just be a random bird and not even a monster. I'm getting kind of hungry, can we stop somewhere soon? Grover asked as they went back to the car. We're almost to Kansas City, but I planned for us to make it to Denver before dinner. We can find something there. Annabeth stated, pulling out the map again. Let's see, we need to take exit. Before she could finish, the bird flew off Percy's shoulder, grabbed the map out of her hand, and flew away. Quote. Well, that sucks. Percy looked up as the bird flew away. Line break. Ocean Song carefully eyed the horizon. The wind whipped through his hair. His divine sense swept out constantly, yet nothing was picked up by him. Despite this, he felt on edge, like something was watching him. He was sitting cross-legged on top of the bus as it drove through the desert. Despite this, he made sure to give Lyra at least half of his attention at any given time with his divine sense. She was happily sitting inside, right under him, eating some snacks he had on him and had given to her. He also made sure to give her a few talismans, just in case. Ocean Song tried several times to get in contact with Hecate or someone else, but still, every time it failed. He looked up, and the same dark clouds still hung overhead. They all but dared him to try and fly up. Despite his concern and trepidation, he was alert. His eyes were closed, but his heart was open. Perhaps that's why he finally felt like whatever was watching him finally made a move. In one fluid motion, he stood up and swung his sheathed sword forward, hitting something and deflecting it. He didn't get a good look at it, but he saw the sand on the side of the rose swirl and thump as if something dived down. Not only that, but his divine sense still didn't detect anything despite sweeping the area for miles. Whatever just attacked him, it was able to evade his senses in this desert area. Ocean Song stood there motionlessly. Once more, he swung his sword and hit something again, barely catching another glimpse of it. On this second trade, he felt more of what he connected with. It wasn't steel or metal of any sort. It felt like something living but hard enough that he couldn't draw blood from that simple trade. Ocean Song couldn't remember the last time he fought an opponent that was able to stand before him in such a way. With a bit of introspection, he realized that all his enemies thus far have either been far out of his weight class or something he could deal with without much effort. Gracefully, Ocean Song took a step forward, and his sword cried out and hit something again. Then again, a flurry of strikes came from all sides. If someone were to watch from the side, they would have seen Ocean Song performing some sort of strange sword dance. Yet with every movement, there was a booming reverberation as if two objects were colliding at high speeds. This battle continued for miles. For the passengers, it simply felt and sounded like thunder from overhead. Ocean Song was taking care not to shake the vehicle too much, even as each strike from his mysterious opponent would surely be debilitating if it landed. He allowed himself to stay on the back foot, to act as if he was unable to take the initiative. Every strike, he reacted, never launching an attack. He bided his time, watching every strike, memorizing the rhythm and interlude between each attack, however small it was. Gradually, he adapted to it, and after deflecting the last strike that seemed to try and pierce towards his head, he shifted his footing and raised his blade high up. His chi flowed out, and before the strike even came, he swung his sword off to the right into the emptiness. A large sword light flashed out, splitting the ground, and right on target, it collided with something he hadn't been able to pinpoint until now. It had surfaced just as his attack landed, causing it to let out a strange sound, blowing away the sands it hid under and revealing it fully. A massive scorpion tail. Ocean Song noted that it belonged to a half-scorpion, half-man-type creature. Beyond what one would expect, the human body parts had 4 arms rather than 2. It was strong. Ocean Song already knew that, but to see it fully now, he had to give it that well-earned title. Just from being able to hide from his senses, he knew that it had to have profound strength. Not to mention, its body was able to contend with his blade. Ocean Song could tell his opponent's body was at least on the level of a nascent soul cultivator. However, his aura was lacking in that regard, more equivalent to a core formation cultivator. It didn't go back under the sands. It looked at Ocean Song, and surprisingly, it pulled out a sword that hung on its waist and a bow on the other side. The creature held up the sword, pointing at him. It was challenging him. Very well. You had not one targeted the bus itself, therefore, I shall accept this warrior's challenge. Ocean Song jumped off the bus, landing on the ground. He was worried about Lyra, yes, but he also made preparations ahead of time. And he would make sure the bus didn't get too far out of his range. Perhaps, it was better that this monster focus only on him rather than the bus. Likewise, he didn't think any other monsters were nearby. With such a powerful monster being here, any others would most likely flee. Above all other thoughts, though, Ocean Song recognized it as a worthy foe. If you challenge me to a duel, then state thy name, fellow Taoist. Ocean Song stepped towards it until he was a polite but proper distance away. The creature let out a noise. It wasn't quite human language, but it carried with it an almost godlike ability to be understood. If Ocean Song weren't a monster himself, he might have mistaken the creature for a god based on presence alone. Akrabuamelu. The name carried weight. It was no mere monster. Just its name carried with it a sort of history, as if projecting its life to Ocean Song to tell him who he was going to duel. Ocean Song now knew who he was fighting. One of the great monsters created to fight the gods of another pantheon. A child of Tiamat, the primordial goddess of salt water from ancient Mesopotamia. In a way, it could be said that both Ocean Song and the Scorpionman were very distant cousins due to their connection with the sea. This one's name is Ocean Song, the son of Poseidon. Ocean Song returned the polite greetings in his own way. Let this be a worthy duel. There were no further words needed to be spoken. The two monsters, children of sea gods, moved at the same time, and their blades clashed, causing the desert to split. Chapter 44. Ocean Song was thankful that he was far away from civilization. Doubly so, he was very happy that he was far enough away from the bus that it didn't get swept up in the initial clash. For about a mile in every direction, a large dust cloud had consumed all around them. Ocean Song could feel it more than ever from just that first clash. His opponent was strong. He knew it logically, of course. But it was one matter to know that a monster was created by a primordial goddess to fight gods, but it was another to cross blades with it. Again, fellow Taoist. Ocean Song let out a shout and quickly his blade found steel again. The large scorpion man can barreling through the sand and dust like it wasn't hampering it in the slightest. Its scimitar-like sword clashed with Ocean Song's favored blade, another cataclysmic blow erupted around them, pushing away the immediate visual obscurities. A pincer stabbed at his head, and he dodged, swinging his sword once more. The monster swung its own sword, deflecting it, with its stinger shooting out at speeds that caused the sound to explode around it. Ocean Song twisted his body to avoid it, the ground beside him had been torn apart on impact. He raised his leg to step on it, pushing himself up off the ground and ascending several meters before swinging down on the creature. The scorpion man brought up both its princes and blocked the swing with its physical body before swinging its own sword in response. Ocean Song jerked his head to the side, a fresh line of blood opened along his cheek, but he just felt exhilaration. Ocean Song ran 2 fingers along the length of his weapon, his chi circulated around it, and like a tidal wave, he thrust his sword forward at the heart of the monster. To his surprise, it wasn't the sword of the monsters, nor his physical body that moved to block or retaliation. The scorpion man instead pulled back the string of his bow, an arrow loosened at frightening speeds met his swordlight head-on. The two forces erupted in an explosion of force between them, forcing the two monsters to separate. Ocean Song slid across the ground, dozens of meters away, regaining his footing. He looked up to see the scorpion man hop across the desert sands like it were actually water for him. He dove into them like a fish diving beneath the waves, disappearing completely. Ocean Song swept his divine sense out, but still couldn't find the monster within the sands of the desert. However, when that familiar stinger shot out of the ground, he was prepared. The resounding clang of sword meeting impossibly hard carapace continued to echo across these desolate sand dunes. Ocean Song knew that he was at a disadvantage. His foe was strange in that his power was only at the equivalent of the core formation stage, yet his physical body was at least at nascent soul, no less than his own. It made breaking his defenses very difficult. Combined with the scorpion man having the absolute advantage of terrain, it was not a simple fight. He briefly wondered if the sands could conceptually count as a sea in this instance. In which case, he was maybe sorta regretting throwing away the trident his father had gifted him all that time ago. Of course, he would never say that out loud. As a proper cultivator, one must not have regrets. Or, more importantly, as a proper cultivator, he didn't want his father to beat him up after hearing something like that after what happened. He didn't have time to dwell on these thoughts, however. Almost like a laser, Ocean Song deflected another blow of the stinger. It came from all angles, at such speeds that a person would probably only see a flash of light, dozens of times over, all around Ocean Song as he moved rhythmically. However, Ocean Song wasn't going to allow him to keep this advantage forever. He gathered his chi, enveloping him in his sword. Finding the perfect opportunity, he raised it up as the next attack came at him. Ocean Sword, first form, crashing waves. He swung his sword down as the desert was split downwards hundreds of feet, forming an abyss. He found the scorpion man seemingly having trouble reorientating himself as heaven and earth had turned upside down. Ocean Song shot right towards him, sword lights flashing out. The scorpion man did his best to block, but it was awkward at best. Ocean Song let out a roar as the two sides collided again. The desert returned to normal, the quaking and rolling sands filled in all chasms, but Ocean Song stood there triumphantly as the scorpion man hit the ground and went sliding across the sands for a bit before stopping. One of his pincers soared through the air, landing not far away from the two of them. Ocean Song let out a breath, shifting his sword stance, his robes billowed amidst the turbulent winds. It put a lot of chi into that blow to get past his defenses. The scorpion man pushed himself up off the ground, swaying slightly as purple blood seeped from where its pincer originally was. It forced itself up straight and readied itself for another round. Ocean Song furrowed his brow. Fellow Taoist, why must you go through such efforts? You are a strong and honorable warrior, why are you acting as a lowly assassin? He could see the mental and physical shock the Scorpion Man went through after losing his pincer. The pain must have been excruciating and debilitating, yet he still persisted rather than trying to run away. In response, however, the Scorpion Man opened his mouth and let out an insect-like roar, not giving any words of compromise. The Akrabuamelu charged at him head-on. Its speed in this desert was bordering godly in simple characteristics. Ocean Song's sword flashed out with deadly blade lights raining down on it, but it raised its remaining pincer and used its own tail as a shield to block his blows. They hit the monster's carapace with barely a scratch as he rammed into Ocean Song. The Cyclops, losing his footing, grunted, impaled his sword into the ground before slamming his back foot into the sands and grabbed the Scorpion's leg, lifting him and tossing him over his head as he went soaring through the air. He quickly grabbed his sword from the ground and channeled a noticeable amount of chi into it and swung at what appeared to be empty air to the mundane eye. However, a deafening boom erupted at the focal point again, causing Ocean Song to skid backwards across the sands. The Scorpion Man was upside down in the air, his hands pulled back on his bow, having just fired an arrow. Just as quickly, 2 more arrows soared through the air. Ocean Song's eyes widened and he was forced to open his third eyes. A baleful aura enveloped him and exploded outwards, meeting the 2 arrows head-on in another explosion. The sands around them shot upwards into the sky, a massive dust cloud that could be seen for miles. The Akrabuamelu chittered across the ground, swaying back and forth with its hands gripping its weapons tightly, staring forward. I see. Ocean Song's voice broke the silence, the baleful aura of his piercing through the sand and dust. With a flick of his hand, it dispersed, revealing him to the Scorpion Man once more. You're burning your soul and blood to increase your power. No, that isn't right. You're doing it to regain your true strength, or to approach your true strength, isn't that right? The top of Ocean Song's robes were gone, and there was blood painted across his chest. The power behind those 2 arrows was a league above what he had experienced beforehand, and it caught him off guard. He now understood his opponent. He found it strange that the Akrabuamelu's body and power were mismatched, but now it made sense. It was because its power had dropped over time. How could a monster created to fight gods merely be at the core formation in power? He was always, at a minimum, at the nascent soul tier, he was simply weakened for some inexplicable reason. Not only that, but Ocean Song realized, his swordsmanship was secondary. His true power laid in his ability with a bow. The Akrabuamelu pulled back its bow slowly, a new arrow pressed against the string. It carried with it a sinister aura that didn't lose out to Ocean Song's baleful aura after opening his third eye. It was as if the world went silent. Ocean Song could hear his heart beat, he could feel the blood and sweat drip down his brow. The faintest movements from his opponent caused him to move at the same time. Ocean Sword, third form, calm waters. He shouted at the same time as the arrow was shot. Waves emerged, surrounding Ocean Song as the desert heart bared down on him, the arrow carrying death collided with his strongest defense. Ocean Song let out another deep breath, stumbling slightly as he caught himself from falling by stabbing his sword into the ground. Behind him, a mountain range had collapsed. The Akrabuamelu didn't immediately follow up. Despite it being an opportunity, it stared at Ocean Song with an indiscernible expression on its face. Only after several moments did it finally speak. Young. Once more, it didn't speak in a normal voice, but something more primal. Its thoughts and feelings conveyed without using mortal means. The Akrabuamelu realized that Ocean Song was still but a young man in front of it. Young, very very young in comparison. Recognition, perhaps guilt. Its feelings were not conveyed on its face. Senior, why do you act as a puppet for someone else? Ocean Song, catching his breath, stood up straighter. He was far from done, even as he noticed the Akrabuamelu's cultivation was continuing to increase. At this point, he felt like the Akrabuamelu was reaching the equivalent of the mid-stages of the nascent soul realm, or rather, returning to such a stage. For the first time, something flashed across the monster's face. Was it shame? Normally, it wouldn't have said anything, merely performing the task it had been given. But right now, it held a certain respect for Ocean Song, this young monster, barely a babe out of its diapers, keeping up with it even after it was pushing itself back to its prime state. It, who had fought gods to win the support of the world, was fighting a junior now to the death and there was yet no clear victor. In respect, it responded. Survival. The information flooded Ocean Song's mind, but he didn't have the chance to contemplate it. The Akrabuamelu charges him again, pushing aside all conflicting emotions. The two monsters continued to clash, steel meeting steel in this lonely desert plain. The losers. Neither of them seemed to care for their wounds as their blades met. Abandoned by their mother. Ocean Song's blade pushed into the Akrabuamelu's side, cutting off a piece of its chitin armor as he narrowly avoided the stringer that aimed for his heart. From a cosmology that no longer held relevance. The Akrabuamelu threw a devastating punch, hitting Ocean Song across the cheek. Ocean Song followed up with his own punch, sending it at the human-like stomach of the scorpion man, causing him to cough out a mouthful of blood. What was the difference between the gods their mother birthed, and them who were called monsters? The difference was who had won the war of fate and survival. Ocean Song could see its history in the words it previous conveyed. Survival wasn't meant to mean living and dying. Ocean Song with his third eye open, he was keeping up with the scorpion man, despite the difference in cultivation. For every blow, he was trading equally, if not coming out on top. The Akrabuamelu's method of regaining its true strength, it wasn't sustainable nor proper, it was eating away at him physically with each passing moment. Another of the scorpion man's limbs flew through the air, one of its many legs. Yet, it barely bat an eye as its pincer thrust out, tearing the flesh from Ocean Song's stomach, leaving a large wound on his abdomen. The Akrabuamelu didn't falter in the slightest, it rammed its bleeding and broken body into Ocean Song. The two of them went tumbling to the ground before Ocean Song kicked him off, swinging his sword and slashing at him with another sword light. Despite another piece of his flesh being cut away, the scorpion man didn't even show the faintest reaction. What were you promised? Ocean Song shouted, his sword colliding with the Akrabuamelu's sword again. What were your promise that made you forsake your honor? Fated to be forgotten. For the first time, it opened its human mouth and spoke in human words as it slid across the sands, losing another of its legs. A place in the world for myself and my siblings. The sinister power around the Akrabuamelu reached its precipice. It was enough that the sheer pressure of it nearly caused Ocean Song to falter. The ancient monster was burning away everything it had. Ocean Song could now see its true heights, how strong it was at its prime. It had breached the realm of Tao seeking. And with all that momentary power available to it, it pulled its bow back, one last arrow aimed at Ocean Song. Ocean Song stilled. From his divine sense, he could see. Directly behind him, right at this angle, the bus carrying Lyra. If he moved, if he dodged, the arrow would destroy everything in its path behind him. The Akrabuamelu knew this too, of course. It had meticulously plotted this exact position, to secure victory. To force Ocean Song to take its strongest attack. There was a brief moment, like the chaos around them no longer existed. The torrent of sinister energy didn't sweep around the ancient monster, nor did Ocean Song's own baleful aura clash against it in a cataclysmic collision for supremacy. Just a single moment where their eyes met. Just as Ocean Song was about to release his domain, something he didn't want to reveal to the world knowing he was being schemed against, he noticed. Akrabuamelu hesitated. And in that brief moment, a dragon roared around Ocean Song, followed by a slash that could split heaven and earth. Akrabuamelu slumped to the ground, a deep cut erupted with blood across its large body. Discarded, forgotten. The ancient monster muttered, dropping its weapons. Ocean Song's arms heavily slumped to his side as he stared up at the dark sky. No. He forced out. He could see the desperation in the ancient monster's eyes when he had the opportunity to, win. A strike at Tao seeking, Ocean Song wasn't even sure with his domain expansion if he could survive that kind of blow head-on, especially when the monster was putting literally everything it had behind it. Yet, despite this, the ancient monster did not shoot that arrow. A victory like this is empty. Ocean Song whispered. Thus, I refuse. Forgotten. No, this Ocean Song will remember you. Rejected by the world. If an honorable warrior like you is rejected by the world, then I will reject the world. The Akrabuamelu barely had the strength to lift its head up. He hadn't used it during the fight because he knew he was being trapped, even hunted. To keep a few cards up one's sleeve, it was the basics to being a cultivator. However, at this moment, he didn't care. His pride wouldn't allow him to not do this. A black and white fish slowly swam out and then it began to form under them. A large Taiji symbol manifested, sealing off heaven and earth. Ocean Song's cultivation began to climb up to the middle stages of the nascent soul realm. Blood rolled down his eyes, all three of them, as he pushed himself. Destiny, karma, fate. Ocean Song spat out. If those are what causes you to fall, to lose your warrior's heart, then they no longer need to exist. Ocean Song threw up a mouthful of blood, but continued to push himself as his eyes strained, veins bulged, and blood continued to pour down his face. I see it. Ocean Song declared as they finally came into view. Like strings that tied around him, that bound his heart. He could see it more clearly now. The monsters birthed by Tiamat. Their clash with the gods to determine who would rule the cosmology of the ancient Sumerians. They lost, they were cast aside, forgotten, discarded. This was their fate, to lose their place in the world. He could barely see them, the strings. Ocean Song knew that his cultivation base was still insufficient. But even so. So what? He held his sword up, and the strings that bound it began to snap one by one. Ocean Song gripped his sword handle with one hand, and with his thumb, pushed the blade out ever so slightly. Not even an inch, barely a fraction of the actual blade met the world for the first time in years, and yet, the world shuddered. An aurora of color burst out, blowing away even the dark skies above. Fate severing. Ocean Song roared with everything he had and swung his sword. It was invisible to the naked eye, but the ripples erupted. Ocean Song couldn't see it for himself, his eyes snapped shut and his body gave out as consciousness was lost. But vaguely, perhaps it was a trick of his ears, he felt like he heard the screams of three old women. Line break. A.N. Ocean Song's first, close fight. The Scorpion Man is more or less equivalent to the giants in what they mean to the Sumerian mythology. Tiamat's godly children want to kill Tiamat, Tiamat creates monster children to fight the gods. They of course, lose, and the monster children are pushed to the side, forgotten essentially. Sorry about the delay, had a flare-up and was having trouble sitting down today. Chapter 45. Odin laid back in his chair, watching the TV as he does often. Through the eyes of his trusty ravens, he could see everything he needed to. Father, I've done as you asked. Thor walked into the room and sounded a mite tired. I must say, that Greek Hydra was no easy opponent. However, it decided to run away mid-fight. My poor bottom is still hurting from where it managed to get some of its poison on my skin. He scratched his head. Thank you, son. Odin grunted in response. It was no trouble, father. Though, I still do not know why you had me go fight that Greek monster. However, it was thrilling all the same. A creature that could even make a god fear its poison, truly it was exhilarating. Odin hummed. Just a small game I'm playing against a few old bats. He didn't want that Hydra around, it was an eyesore for what he was planning. Thor looked around, and his eyes fell on the TV. Oh, is it our Cyclops friend? He perked up. What manner of creature is that? He was, of course, referring to the half-scorpion man that also appeared. Akrabuamelu. From the old Sumerian lot that aren't around anymore. Odin replied. It was birthed by their primordial goddess in antiquity. Long before you were born. Ah, I seem to recall you mentioning them in the past. Thor nodded. Monsters do fade much slower than gods do when their faith collapses. Faith was a very elusive term even for gods. What was faith? What constituted it? The most direct answer would be someone who believes wholeheartedly, but if that were the case, then how would many of the old gods today still persist? How many people genuinely still worship the Greek or Norse gods and revere them as deities they know exist, compared to Christianity or any of the other modern religions? The answer is more of a vague notion of acknowledgement. Odin, Thor, and Loki are household names in a significant portion of the world. By extension, the idea of the Norse cosmology is still present across the globe even if many don't worship it like in the past. Who, in these modern times, even remembers the name of more than one or two deities from ancient Mesopotamia among the common folk? Did you send me out to help our Cyclops friend, father? Thor asked, sitting down next to Odin. Odin gave a slow nod, leaning back. Those three crones wanted to get rid of him. How despicable. Thor looked aghast. I never did like the way they meddle so much. Why could they not be like our Norns, who simply watch the strings of fate as observers? Who knows? Maybe in time, even our Norns will get bored and want to stick their hands into the great tapestry and become part of the grand game. Odin gave a cryptic reply. Odin looked up towards the ceiling, but he was more so looking somewhere else. Some should learn a lesson or two from their cousins and keep their hands out of other people's cookie jars. Though he spoke, Thor didn't hear the words, they instead reverberated through the realms. How did he do it? That's impossible. He cut my hand. The frantic shouts of the fates echoed pleasantly in the ears of Odin. Thor was many things, but subtle was not one of them. Odin's little trick just then went completely unnoticed by him. The fates immediately turned their attention to him, furious, but they dared not speak a word. They didn't speak because they had been shamed to a greater extent than they had ever experienced before. Anthropos, the one responsible for cutting the strings, the very fates of others, was currently nursing her hand. Golden blood dripped onto the ground, and a cut could be seen across her skin, her scissors having fallen to the ground. Their frantic and panicked yelling had ye to cease. Odin wasn't surprised, it was the first time they've probably ever experienced being hurt. Odin snorted and turned away. He never considered them opponents. Despite them being powerful enough that it made him wary, they fell short when it came to scheming. When you could easily control the fates of everyone with ease, when would you ever have to learn how to plan or strategize? He shook his head finally, ignoring them completely, giving some last parting words. Giving false hope, lying to that poor creature to use as a disposable pawn, how crude. In the East, they called it karma. For Odin and most gods in these parts, they called it causality. The concept was something that no gods could escape. It was intertwined with their very beings due to being gods and connected with the world. As the mortals say, all actions have consequences. What many gods don't know, or don't care to understand, is that something even as simple as lying carries with it a casualty that can land on their heads at the worst time. It's why Odin rarely, if ever, lied like this. That isn't to say he's never lied before. He's a ruthless god, and he's done many a thing that would make most people side-eye him. Perhaps, it was Loki's presence that caused him to subtly change over the years. He would freely admit that he was a bit more like Zeus than many realize, but his mind became sharper when he had to battle wits with someone like Loki. To lie to that older monster creature, to give it false hope of a place within their cosmological umbrella, that was crude, not just in execution but in divine providence. A big lie like that, if the creature succeeded as planned, would have consequences when it falls through. There was a reason that the Greek gods had so many issues, comparative to even the Norse. Off the top of his head, Odin could only pick out a handful of gods from the Greeks that observed causality properly like he did. Out of the actual Olympians, that number dwindled even more. He would at least acknowledge their goddess of wisdom for understanding these concepts and acknowledging them. Odin wasn't even sure Zeus knew, or if he did, he simply didn't care. Unfortunately, such consequences don't always land on the gods themselves directly. For many Greeks who simply didn't care much beyond their own well-being and desires, if their children or associates caught strays, it was just an unfortunate conclusion. Such deep and interwoven cosmic concepts made it hard to link them, to follow the trails, and to be able to pin one consequence to one action. But Odin was pretty sure that the reason the Greek demigods even have so much trouble with monsters in the first place is because their gods have just run rampant for too long and simply accumulated that cosmic debt. I have a question, Father. Why is that monster this far west? Shouldn't it be clinging to the last vestiges of its homeland to prolong its existence? It may very well fade if it doesn't return home in the next few days. Thor spoke up. A lie mistaken for a promise. Odin grunted. It thought it was achieving a new home for itself, but it simply ended up being cast aside as a disposable pawn. Odin wasn't beyond sympathy, it just usually took a back burner when it came to his priorities. He did sympathize, knowing that this monster was promised entry into the Greek mythos, a chance at survival for it and its kin, only for it to be all a fabrication. Maybe it even knew that it was a lie from the start, but it still wanted to hope. Such is the existence of one nearly forgotten by the world. Someday too, Odin recognized, that could be him. Father, should I go help? Thor asked, staring at the screen. He came in at the end, not seeing the good parts. But that was fine, Odin recorded everything. He wouldn't mind watching it again with his son. But now, the Akrabuamelu stood over the Cyclops, who had collapsed from doing something he quite frankly shouldn't have been able to do. Truthfully, Odin wasn't quite sure how the Cyclops pulled it off either. He knew that the brat was hiding something in that sword of his, and he managed to even cut at those 3 old crones. But then again, those strange and rare beings who could defy fate, they often did things beyond common sense. The scorpion monster was beaten and nearly broken, with not much life left inside of it, in all honesty. Odin agreed with his son's words, it would probably fade for good if it didn't return to its home quickly. No need. Odin told Thor. The heart of a warrior is a strange and oddly beautiful thing. The Scorpion Man, despite most likely still believing that his chance at survival was in front of him, with a swing of its sword, could earn a continued existence. Ocean Song was passed out, completely unguarded. Yet, he didn't swing, he didn't harm him at all. Carefully, the Akrabuamelu lifted Ocean Song up over his shoulder and did his best to shuffle towards the bus that was driving away in the distance. There are some things that can even move a ruthless god like Odin. A raven followed after the Akrabuamelu. Line break. Ocean Song shot up from his prone position. He looked around, anxious, ready to continue a fight that seemingly had already passed. He unconsciously reached for his sword, and he found it at his side, grabbing it protectively. But once he came to his senses, he realized where he was, and confusion washed over him. For he was not lying face first in the desert, rather, he was now back on top of the bus. Rather quickly, he leaned down over the edge and saw Lyra still in her seat, looking rather happy, if tired. She noticed Ocean Song poking his head down and smiled brightly, waving at him, completely unaware of what had transpired earlier. Ocean Song, despite the pain in his body, smiled and waved back before sitting back up on top of the bus. He let out a sigh, looking up at the still dark sky. The path to the Tao is long. May we meet again, friend. He raised his sword up in proper acknowledgement of the warrior he had fought. Knowing that he was safe, that Lyra was safe, and that everything seemed to calm down, he took a cross-legged position to inspect himself properly. He circulated his cultivation base to assess the damage. He was a bit weak at the moment, he noted. Opening his third eye to boost his physical abilities, it certainly was draining even to him, who had become nascent soul. Though, that is to say, his physical body gets stronger along with his cultivation base, so it would never fall behind. He tried to remember the feeling of that last slash of his, but it was fleeting and ethereal. He felt like he touched on something too early for him and overexerted himself, again. This time though, it was more unintentional. But what kind of cultivator would he be if he didn't repeat the same mistakes several times? And things weren't all bad, there were even gains. Ocean Song smiled lightly as he noted his cultivation base had broken through. He had reached the middle stages of the nascent soul realm. How did that happen? Well, he wasn't quite sure yet. Truthfully, he hadn't even thought fully about the next steps in the nascent soul realm. He had been consumed by other thoughts that had taken his attention. Building his sect had been a nearly full-time engagement for him. That's not to say he was neglecting his cultivation, but it was proper to let a person rest and digest their new profound realm when breaking through. It hadn't even been that long since he broke through to the nascent soul realm. He was trying to think back to how it happened, as it was so natural and in the middle of the fight. He thought of his opponent, the Akrabuamelu, and what had caused it. Was it simply a matter of fighting a life or death battle that pushed him that far? He wasn't quite sure that was the case. He could guess that it certainly helped. The ancient and sacred texts he had read in the past often mentioned acquiring real battle experience as being important. Perhaps he should find a sealed realm somewhere to delve into to search for treasures that only opens once every 10,000 years that just so happens to be opening when he's nearby. Or maybe he should find an auction that only takes place every century that just so happens to be taking place again as he's nearby. Which will inevitably lead to him acquiring a treasure that causes jealousy from others and makes them attack him. It was unfortunate that he no longer had the sacred texts to research from in this life. But he was getting distracted. He focused back on his cultivation base, particularly his nascent soul. A nascent soul was exactly that, the nascent immortal soul that a cultivator nurtures to immortality. It had grown quite a bit since his first breakthrough into the realm initially. But he wasn't sure what caused it to grow to such an extent. He kept replaying the scenes in his head from the fight, how he felt, his emotions, his exertions, his power, and any hint at all. It took him a while, but he finally seemed to reach enlightenment. He stopped meditating and opened his eyes, leaning back, catching himself with his hands before he fell backwards and relaxed. He let out another long breath. It seemed obvious in hindsight. What is a soul? It's a record of our experiences, of our lives. A nascent soul needs to live to grow. It needs to experience life. The 7 emotions were pivotal to the growth of his nascent soul. Just as he understood that, a strange, almost foreign thought entered his mind and burrowed deep into his heart. It was enough that he took his gourd and drank a large mouthful several times in a row. Why did my mother abandon me? He said softly to no one in particular. He didn't know why he suddenly had that thought, or why it took precedence, but it refused to leave his heart, and he had a newfound understanding that if this wasn't settled, he wouldn't be able to break through to the next realm. He slapped his storage pouch and took out a fresh set of robes and changed into them before cleaning up his appearance. As a proper cultivator, it's important to look immaculate. Of course, there was the exception of being disheveled and having clothes torn from a fight, which had its own charm. But after it's over, cleaning up is a necessity to retain the elegance of a cultivator. Though, his spirits weren't lifted much. He took another drink from his gourd and settled on a plan for the future. After he was done with this little adventure, he was going to have to go find his father and ask him about his mother. Chapter 46. Apollo sat on his divine throne with the other Olympians. Many lesser gods would covet his position, but right now, he shrunk back, wishing he could be any other place. But if he tried to secretly send his mind somewhere else, he knew he'd get a swift kick in the rear. Of the divine sort. And the next two teams are getting ready to depart from camp within the day. Athena finished her report. Thank you, daughter. Zeus replied as she took the hint to go back to her seat. He glanced at Hera, who nodded curtly. There was still a very distinct tension in the air, even more so than when all those other gods came and kicked their asses. At least with that, everyone knew that it wasn't going to be a real fight, and they were just venting or taking the chance to throw a few punches because they had the excuse. Apollo would freely admit that they would have jumped on the same opportunity had it been another pantheon that screwed the pooch like they did. But with Hera, he was genuinely afraid. Not in a comical, oh no, don't beat me up way, but afraid of what she could do. The first few times Hera raged, it was funny. Apollo shared a few laughs, privately, with Dionysus. But, well, it quickly went from kind of funny to kind of bad. She already hated all the kids down in the camp. What if she really just throws her hands up after this failed quest and decides to start smiting? He knew their dad wouldn't punish her in any meaningful way. Despite all the fighting they do about his cheating, she is undeniably his soft spot. Even when she schemed with their uncle and Athena to chain him up and force him to be a better ruler, her punishments were significantly less in comparison. Of course, no one would call him out on it. It was no secret that their dad would humor Hera until he was directly affected. At what point that's reached was anyone's guess, and that scared Apollo. Moving on to the next point, the amount of times everyone is allowed to interfere during this large quest. Zeus's voice carried with his signature booming. Quests were, ironically, one of the few times that the gods could both interfere and also not interfere in the world without consequences. There were obviously rules, but they could also be much more blunt about their divine intervention. But the rules were loosened a bit. It was the nature of a divine quest, a movement of fate even beyond what the fates can control altogether, as even they are just custodians under the universal concept that governs the Greek cosmology. A quest in the Greek parts of the world was always accompanied by a prophecy, a string of fate that dictated the outcome of the quest in question. Even if they didn't know the prophecy, it didn't mean there wasn't one. There were certain points that were unchangeable. A to B to C in the quest that the prophecy and fate dictated. However, this also meant that regardless of what the gods did in between, the prophecy still was fulfilled as it should be, thus rendering their interference moot. World laws straightened out any curveballs the gods threw out to make sure the story ended the same, with the major plot points not changing even if the details did. It's why great quests were always a big deal. It gave the gods a chance to maneuver and do things they normally couldn't get away with. He briefly took a look at some of his kids heading across the country. One of his daughters just shot a harpy out of the sky, it was a good shot. Another of his sons, who preferred a sword, had just stabbed it into a giant rat creature that he was fairly sure wasn't part of their cosmology. But that was neither here nor there. Monsters come and go everywhere, especially when it is their kids traveling so far from home. Otherwise, most of his kids out and about were still just driving or making headway west. He felt guilty that it was his fault that this was happening. He really did try his best to get a prophecy after he accidentally broke his oracle. He was still confused why his oracle was trying to bang Thanatos. She was a zombie, right? Is Thanatos into that sort of thing? He even asked his uncle down below, and he just shrugged in confusion too. Was Thanatos really trying to court his oracle? Apollo. Zeus's voice boomed. Apollo perked up. Sorry, I was trying to see if I could glean any new prophecy. He quickly lied as to why he wasn't paying attention. Zeus seemed to appreciate that response and didn't press it. Did you find out anything new? Hera also stared at him. Give me a second, I was halfway through. Now he really had to try and see if he could glean anything. Contrary to what many think, he doesn't just see the future, without any consequences. Hell, he doesn't even get to control what he sees most of the time. It was bitter about it, but his domain of prophecy was almost entirely out of his hands. That is to say, he only saw what the fates wanted him to see. He could glimpse at the strings of fate with their permission. Quests. Those were more or less derived from the fates themselves, and he, and by extension his oracle, was just a mouthpiece. He closed his eyes and focused. He looked towards where the strings of fate were in. Why were the fates screaming? It started with a blood-curdling scream, then it switched to an angry and furious scream. How did he do that? I don't know. That's impossible, he's immortal. He cut my hand. He got my finger too. He almost got my face. This is impossible. Anomaly. He must be removed. Then the sound of a bird cawing, almost mockingly. Go away, you damn bastard. You're breaking the rules, be gone. Get out of here. They roared furiously, and Apollo felt the backlash through his prophecy domain. Apollo opened his eyes with a strange expression. The future is muddled. Line break. The next few hours for Ocean Song had been quiet and peaceful. But he knew that wouldn't last. He played enough games in his past life to know that escort quests never relented after the first enemy attack. Thus, while he quietly cultivated on top of the bus, he kept his divine sense spread out. Not a single chicken or dog escaped his perception. Mostly because there were no chickens or dogs in the desert. But that was neither here nor there. He spent the next several hours slowly recovering from his battle. Physically, he was getting close to being fully healed, but it would take a bit longer to fully recover. Not to mention, he had many new insights to digest from his recent battle. He got up and stretched because the bus started to slow down. They were coming up to a pit stop that had several other buses and trucks parked around. It seemed to be a normal stop, but Ocean Song was not oblivious to the rather strange scene taking place. That is to say, the staff were all sphinxes. The mascot was also a sphinx. Sphinx Station, the name of the rest stop, said. They weren't particularly powerful. Though one presence above all stood among them. There was one massive sphinx that towered over the buildings. It sat there motionless, simply observing everything. He didn't feel any hostility from it, but knowing what happened to his junior brother, he didn't have a good impression of their kind. They noticed him, but they didn't go immediately hostile. In fact, he was almost certain they could smell Lyra as well, as her demigod scent was hard to miss for his fellow monsters. But, they just kept working like normal, or what goes for normal around here. He saw a sphinx with a mist illusion over her as she walked a food order to a parked car, as a portion of the building was a dedicated restaurant. There was another sphinx that was sweeping by the gas pumps. And near the back, there were a couple more that were unloading a truck, presumably to restock the shelves inside. It was rather fascinating in a way. You got an hour. If you're late, we're leaving without you. The bus driver, he declared as he got off the bus with many of the people following behind him. Ocean Song hopped off the top and landed at the doors, holding his hand out as Lyra stepped down the steps, grabbing it happily. Mr. Ocean, I need to use the bathroom. She said quietly. But, she looked at the Sphinx. No need to worry, I'll take you there. Ocean Song smiled. He eyed the Sphinxes, who didn't stop him, barely even giving him a look as he led her inside. Welcome to Sphinx's station. Our special today is, the Sphinx inside that greeted them paused and looked at him. Ocean Song and Lyra looked back. Quote. Greek or Egyptian? Ocean Song asked. Quote. Egyptian. The Sphinx answered back. Ocean Song relaxed a little bit. He recalled a tidbit that the Egyptian Sphinxes were much more reasonable. It was a Greek Sphinx that attacked his brother. Bathroom? Ocean Song asked. The Sphinx held up its front paw, pointing to the sign that led to the bathrooms. He nodded to it and went on his way with Lyra. Strangely, there was no trap, which confused Ocean Song even more. He stood guard outside the little girl's room as Lyra did his private business, waiting for the proverbial shoe to drop, but it never did. Beyond some of the staff shooting him looks from time to time, they didn't show any overt hostility. I'm done, Mr. Ocean. Lyra grabbed his hand again with a big smile. Do you want to get some more snacks? Ocean Song offered. We still have a long drive. Can I get some candy? Her eyes widened in barely contained excitement. Sure, whatever you want. His heart softened seeing her nearly bounce around with excitement. It was her turn to lead him around as she danced between the aisles. He realized that he hadn't ever been in a store like this ever since he had begun his pursuit of the Tao in this life. It was nostalgic in a way to see things so similar but different. There were, of course, many oddities to his eyes. Aphrodite's Delight, a type of chocolate bar. Zeus bolts, which looked like a ripoff of a different colorful rainbow candy that took the form of little spheres, but these had little lightning bolts on them rather than a certain S. This seemed to be the norm around here. He even found a brand of bubble gum with his father's name on it. Poseidon brand Ocean Mint bubble gum. He, of course, intended to buy one pack. Lyra hid behind him as they approached the counter to pay. A sphinx sitting behind the register gives them a strange look. It was comical, in a way, to watch a giant cat creature shuffle through their stack of snacks, ringing up each purchase. $27.43. Ocean Song wordlessly set some cash on the counter, and the Sphinx took it, counted it, and then began to count out individual coins for his change with its large paws. Here's your change. Thank you, have a good day. It said casually to him. Admittedly, he was still waiting for something to happen, but once more, nothing did. He was beginning to wonder if he was actually in a drunken stupor and passed out on the bus still. However, once they walked outside, his cultivator senses tingled, and he was ready to spring into action. There were a dozen sphinxes surrounding them, and the massive sphinx towering above them looked down with its ancient eyes. Halt, mortal, still your stride. Though it may be crass, you may not pass. Until you play our ancient game and answer right, or leave in shame. One of the sphinxes spoke up. What? Ocean Song cocked his head. Not by sword, nor coin, nor plea, but by the riddles shall you be free. Pass our questions, one by one, fail, and your journey is undone. Another one spoke. Pardon. First we ask a riddle, and then you try. Get it wrong, and say goodbye. Quote. They waited for his response with anticipation. Why are you all rhyming all of a sudden? Because he clearly saw them talking normally before. It's part of our shtick, okay. The Sphinx in the front said, presumably, their leader. Just, you can't go past until you answer our riddle, okay. Question. What? If you can go past, does that also mean you can go future? Ocean Song asked. The Sphinx was about to respond, but its eyes widened, and it seemed to genuinely start contemplating his words. It went silent and seemed utterly stuck on his question. Then it seemed to panic. Mother! It cried out, and the massive Sphinx slowly opened its eyes. Fear not, child, let me handle this. This one is beyond your wit to handle. The large Sphinx, despite having a loud voice, carried a strange gentleness to it. I will be your opponent, young Cyclops. The other small Sphinx began to back away. As in a fight. He asked, gripping his sword. The large Sphinx blinked once. Did you not hear me, my child? You just need to answer a riddle. That is your challenge. And what happens if I lose? He put a protective hand on Lyra, who was a bit scared still. Quote. It looked down at them with authoritative eyes. One of us has to give themselves up, is that it? Ocean Song narrowed his own eyes. You won't. $1,000. What? $1,000, that's the price if you get the riddle wrong. The large Sphinx stated firmly. As the ancient codes dictate, you passed through our lands, thus, you must play the game. The sphinxes all around them lifted up their heads and let out mighty roars. You don't want to eat one of us. They stopped, and the big sphinx returned its gaze to them. No, why would we? It asked in confusion. Yummy demigod. Ocean Song pointed to Lyra. Lyra also nodded, seemingly confused too. The massive sphinx looked offended. We are ancient and noble protectors of the pharaoh's bloodline. We don't eat demigods. She scoffed. Ocean Song's eyes widened. I apologize, fellow Taoist, for offending you. He quickly clasped his hands and performed a respectful bow. This lowly Cyclops has only met Greek sphinxes, and my perception was muddled. Clearly, you are of a noble and exalted lineage that does not lose itself in base instincts. The big sphinx preened at his praise. You are forgiven for your ignorance, little Cyclops. Our Greek cousins are, unfortunately, of a lesser breed. Ocean Song nodded. Quote. May this one ask, why $1,000? Running a business is expensive. She said simply. Ocean Song nodded in understanding, it made perfect sense to him. However, there was one problem. He didn't have $1,000 on him. Then, I shall ask you a riddle. No. Ocean Song interrupted her. His robes billowed heroically, and his hair danced in the wind. I'll ask you a riddle. He declared. Okay. The big sphinx shrugged. Ask away. But be warned, young one. I have walked this world for many years, I have searched and gathered all the greatest riddles across the realms. From the great pyramids of Egypt to the great oceans. I have spoken to saints and sages, the wisest of humans and monsters alike. If you dare, then speak your riddle. Ocean Song didn't expect that to work so easily. But he was prepared, for he was a cultivator, and he knew the vastness of heaven and earth. And he had once consulted the great sage of Google and remembered a riddle. I have 2 coins that equal 30 cents, one of them isn't a nickel. What coins do I have? Quote. Quote. Ocean Song nodded. The Sphinx then went deep into thought. Quote. 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 The ancient being opened her mouth to relay wisdom. This is a stupid riddle. Quote. I'm sorry. Ocean Song apologized. Several more minutes passed as the silence stretched onwards. Are you giving up? Ocean Song clasped his hands behind his back, probing her lightly. Fine, tell me the answer. She harumphed. And it better not be a lie. Of course it's a nickel and a quarter. I only said one of them isn't a nickel, then obviously, the other one is. Truly, he was a cultivation genius, rendering the Sphinx speechless. My reward? Ocean Song asked, very pleased with himself. The great and wise Sphinx that served pharaohs in past ages, resisted the urge to smack him. The Sphinx's lips curled up. When did I say you get a reward for winning? I only said you have to pay if you lost. Ocean Song's mouth opened and his eyes widened in realization. He had been fooled and could only swallow the bitter pill. Truly, this Sphinx was wise beyond all measure. He acknowledged his loss there. He could only accept that he had been outwitted even though he won. But, I'll give you a warning for playing along when you didn't have to. The Sphinx relaxed, clearly having only treated this whole thing as a game. Beware the next town you pass through, for an evil presence has taken over the town. An evil presence? Ocean Song whispered. What foul evils await us on our journey forward, noble Sphinx mother? It has a name. She leaned down, her face getting serious. Amazon. Line break. A.N. For those who don't know, Amazon in PJO is literally run by the Amazons from Greek myths, and they're basically evil. They literally have the goal of world domination. So, kinda like normal Amazon, but more supernatural and kidnapping. If you want to read one chapter ahead or support me, visit my page AStoryForOne. AStoryForOne. I also have a boosty if you can't use the above under the same name. 53 comments 0 vote. Chapter 47. Higher. Ocean Song asked. Higher, higher. Lyra yelled happily. And Ocean Song lifted her up as high as he could. The wind whipped through her hair, and she let out a high-pitched, albeit good-natured, scream. Now, someone may question if holding a young child up on top of a bus moving 70 or 80 miles per hour was a good idea. To that, Ocean Song would respond that he only has good ideas, therefore, he sees no problem with it. That is also to say, Ocean Song was many things, but he certainly wasn't an idiot. He could protect her quite easily like this, and there was in fact less danger than if she were sitting inside, directly out of his arm's reach. She was having so much fun, she didn't even notice the actual danger happening right now. As Ocean Song casually threw a few water droplets, turning them into projectiles and piercing some flying monsters that were chasing them. Lyra didn't see the monster corpses that had been left in their wake the past several hours. It was Ocean Song's goal for the remainder of this trip. Lyra was still young, and her life hadn't been easy with everything involving her heritage. While the orphanage they stayed at was relatively safe, there was no doubt she experienced her share of monsters in her short life so far. And especially on this trip, they had run into a few monsters. Even those sphinxes, despite the fact that they weren't hostile, scared Lyra, and she was hiding behind him the entire time. Thus, Ocean Song had this goal. While he couldn't remove her fear, a healthy fear for a demigod, he could at least turn this trip from a terrifying experience to something resembling thrilling for her so it didn't leave too many bad lasting impressions. Like seeing a scary movie rather than constantly having near-death experiences. Maybe it was a foolish goal, but he would do his best to take care of Hecate's daughter. Otherwise, besides the very random monsters that Ocean Song had to kill after they left the Sphinx station, it had been a rather quiet drive. In fact, the next town was up ahead, and they seemed to be leaving the more isolated parts of the desert. Ocean Song sat Lyra next to him on the top of the bus as they entered town. The smaller girl looked excitedly at everything, even if it was just the most mundane. She didn't have many experiences out and about, spending almost all her time at the orphanage. Simply going out to see a new city or town was something exciting for her. Mr. Ocean, look, there's a zoo. Lyra nearly jumped off the bus as she grabbed his sleeve, pointing at a big billboard. Ocean Song mentally checked the bus schedule he heard when he got on. They did have a bit of a layover in this town. He just nodded, as he knew what they would be doing for the next few hours. Line break. Lyra happily held Ocean Song's hand as he paid for the tickets at the zoo. It wasn't far away from the bus station. And they were told that departure would be in 6 hours from now, plenty of time to play around. Of course, there was a worrying concern. The warning he received from the Mother Sphinx before. And now, he saw signs all over the place for Amazon. However, he had yet to run into any evildoers, so he put it out of his mind for now. Can we go look at the sharks first, Mr. Ocean? We sure can. Ocean Song smiled. I also like sharks. She nearly skipped away in excitement as they began to maneuver through the zoo exhibits. There aren't many people there at the moment, possibly because it is the middle of the day during a weekday when most people are at work. There was an aquarium-like portion that they found easily. There was a small, shallow pool area with various signs, and Lyra all but ran over and carefully knelt at the edge to see the starfish inside. It wasn't just starfish. Ocean Song spotted a turtle casually coasting. It looked up at Ocean Song as well, meeting his gaze. Greetings, Senior. Ocean Song spoke, using his chi to separate the sound away from Lyra. Oh, a child of the sea. The turtle had an aged voice, though it wasn't talking in a way that other people understood. As a child of Poseidon, Ocean Song could understand aquatic creatures. How long has it been since I've seen one of you? A great day, a great day. Do you enjoy your time here, Senior? Or would you like to return to the vast waters of the world? Why would I want to leave? The turtle replied. It's so nice and peaceful here. I don't have to worry about any predators, I don't have to worry about food, and there are some lovely little turtle ladies that I spend my evenings with. Ocean Song just smiled. May I make a request, Senior? This young lady here would be thrilled to see your magnificent shell up close. Are you against her touch or find it insulting in any way? Ho ho, it's no problem. I let some of the surface hatchlings touch me every now and then. He slowly swam over, right up to Lyra. Mr. Ocean, look. He came right up to me. Lyra squeaked in excitement as she hesitantly reached out and rubbed the turtle on the shell. Ocean Song could tell that the senior turtle was amused by it. Be sure to thank the turtle by giving it some food. Ocean Song gestured to a little device that you could press, and it would dispense some food for the animals in these little artificial ponds. Ocean Song thanks the turtle himself and takes the opportunity to flash his divine sense out, not noticing any big lurking threats like a giant dragon or anything. Otherwise, he didn't think there would be much danger. Sharks, sharks, I want to see the sharks. Lyra started chanting, and Ocean Song obliged, taking her deeper into the aquarium sections. There was a large tank, the size of several houses at least. Big enough that the larger aquatic life could move around, but to Ocean Song, who was a child of the sea, it still felt cramped just looking at it. She pressed her face right up against the thick glass with wide eyes as she saw many different species of sea life. There's one, she called out, pressing her finger against the glass as a shark passed. And that one too, that one is bigger. Ocean Song smiled. It was enjoyable. Not just because he liked seeing Lyra so excited and happy, but because he felt a stirring in his Tao heart, which correlated to his cultivation base. His Tao heart was becoming firmer. And he could feel a tugging in his cultivation base as his nascent soul grew ever so slightly. This was good for both him and his cultivation. Oh no, Mr. Ocean, that other shark is bullying the smaller one. Lyra pointed out. Ocean Song looked up, and he sort of became startled after what he saw. The shark she was pointing at was the bigger of the two. It was odd. Its proportions were very off, its fins looked more like arms, and it seemed to be able to crane the upper part of its body, sort of like a neck. Oh no, they're fighting. Lyra cried out. Yeah. They weren't fighting. It only took a glance for Ocean Song to see through what they were doing. That was most certainly not fighting. At least, not in the way she thought. And what was worse, Ocean Song could hear them. Yeah, you like that. You little. He quickly forced himself to pull his divine sense away so he could no longer hear the bigger shark fighting with the smaller one. However, almost immediately the bigger shark stopped, slowly turning its big shark head towards them, looking at them through the glass. The shark met Ocean Song's gaze. It wasn't a normal shark. It was most certainly some form of monster shark. Words didn't need to be spoken, there was a tacit understanding between men not to say anything and pretend this didn't happen. Come on, let's go look at some of the other animals. Ocean Song gently but firmly led Lyra away from the not shark, definitely not fighting. Line break. Can we go to the store, Mr. Ocean? Lyra asked. She was referring to the souvenir shop that had a bunch of bright and colorful toys and oddities that attracted her attention. Sure, let's go. Ocean Song let her lead the way. And he was happy to go. He was very happy to get her out of this damn zoo. Because, come to find out, the shark monster wasn't an outlier. They had a panda exhibit, there was a panda yukai enjoying himself. They went to see some giraffes, there was apparently a bipedal type of giraffe monster enjoying himself. Snakes. Yup. Birds. Also yes. Ocean Song was wondering if he was actually one of the sane monsters around. He felt like his innocence had been lost on this trip. Thankfully, Lyra just seemed completely oblivious, only noting that all the animals were fighting a lot. Feel free to pick out anything you want. Ocean Song patted her head. Despite the awkward viewing experience, Lyra was having fun, that's what mattered. And as they browsed, Ocean Song saw a familiar face. Lyra saw it too and immediately went to hide behind him. There was a sphinx in the shop, looking at some funny hats. It looked over, surprised to see them too. Oh, it's you. It said rather casually. His eyes landed on Lyra. I'm not going to eat you, you don't have to hide. Ocean Song gently put a hand on her and helped her come out to the front. She's still young and hasn't had good experiences with monsters yet. The Sphinx raised an eyebrow, looking at him as if to ask if she knew that he was also a monster. Ocean Song shrugged helplessly. Children are strange. Can I touch your fur? Lyra asked quietly, seemingly having gathered her courage. All right. The Sphinx didn't seem to care. Lyra hesitantly took a few steps forward and poked him like he was a fire and she would get burned if she lingered too long. But Ocean Song recognized progress. Did you come to see the animals? He looked down at Lyra. Lyra nodded her head, sort of making herself smaller, but she didn't immediately run and hide. We're going to see the lions next. For some reason the Sphinx now looked awkward. There, tired and sleeping, there's no point in seeing them right now. Anything you want to say, fellow Taoist. Ocean Song replied in a flat tone. The Sphinx had the sense to look embarrassed. Don't judge me. There was an awkward silence that Lyra didn't seem to pick up on. Quote. Where do you think all the Sphinxes come from back at the store? He pursed his lips. Is that why you're here in this city, fellow Taoist? Your matriarch spoke ill of the evil here. Ocean Song asked. No, I was actually heading over to talk to the boss of that place because a few of our suppliers fell through. Weren't they evil? He shrugged. I'm a monster. Evil is relative. And mom is kind of old-fashioned, she hates capitalism. She calls every major company evil. So, they're not evil. Oh no, they're actually evil, just saying. He shook his head. What did they do that's so evil? See, they undercut local business to the point where they can't compete. Running prices into the ground until they go under and monopolize the local shipping and supplies industries. Then they roll out in bigger scales, slowly eating up other adjacent businesses so they can do everything themselves, controlling all processes of supplies and distribution completely. All the local and state businesses have to go through them, or they can't get their stores stocked. Ocean Song's eyes widened. Fellow Taoist, please let me clarify. Are you saying that they have put a stranglehold over the resources in the region into the hands of a select few, then through their lower levels, force others to compete for meager offerings while they hold onto the vast majority for themselves? With the threat of complete destruction if they step out of line. I guess. The Sphinx nodded. Quote. This is no mere evil, fellow Taoist. What are you? This is a fellow sect. Ocean Song exclaimed. Truly, I have been blind to the deeds of the Amazon sect. Quote. I must speak to their sect leader to learn their secrets. Ocean Song declares. We shall join you on your journey. It's like 4 blocks away. But sure, why not? The Sphinx shrugged. The Sphinx didn't mind, even if he found this Cyclops to be a bit on the crazy side. He seemed strong, and at the very least, it might help in case the Amazons tried to put him in a crate and sell him again. Come, Lyra. We will go learn how to be a proper cultivation sect from the experts. The Sphinx paused, questioned his decision, then shrugged. It was still probably better than getting stuffed into a crate and sold by those equally crazy Amazons. Probably. Line break. Ocean Song discovers another sect, and he goes to seek their expertise. If you want to read 1 chapters ahead or support me, Visit my page AStoryForOne AStoryForOne. I also have a boosty if you can't use the above under the same name. 54 comments 0 vote. Chapter 48. Ocean Song held Lyra's hand as he walked alongside his new Sphinx friend. The building had the big logo that Ocean Song recognized from his past life. In fact, it looked almost exactly how he would have imagined it. A big warehouse, connected to a bunch of office-like buildings. A large courtyard, many benches, a few fountains, very simple and modern. Truly, Ocean Song noted, they mastered the art of hiding in plain sight. To build a sect in the mortal world, he recognized their prowess. However, the 6+ foot tall women made of muscles carrying swords did throw off the mortal aesthetic a little bit. However, they weren't stopped, even as the beautiful muscular women eyed them suspiciously. With a purpose, they marched right through the front doors and to the Amazon lady working the front desk. Dressed like a secretary, she too had a sword at her side. Ocean Song saw nothing wrong with this, in fact, he praised them in his heart. Truly, their hearts carried the sword Tao if they kept one close even during work like this. The Amazon barely looked up from her computer as their motley crew walked in. Hey, I have an appointment. The Sphinx casually spoke, putting his elbow on the desk, like he had done this plenty of times before. The Queen will be with you shortly, please have a seat. She gestured to the various chairs set up in the lobby. He just nodded. Being too large for one of the chairs, he casually sat down in the open area. Lyra and Ocean Song, however, were more captivated by something happening through one of the side windows. This specific window looked out into the warehouse portion of the building. They could see the various operations, boxes, and crates stacked up as far as the eye could see. Amazons and regular humans working together to move everything. However, most peculiar was the fact that not everything there was mundane. The most obvious thing was the literal cages of monsters stacked and sorted to the side. Oddly, it wasn't just the Amazons handling them, he could see some regular humans come along with forklifts or other machines and move the monsters to various places. There were also boxes marked with the symbols of gods. Various items of magical and mystical properties seemed to be also moved around within the confines of this building. Ocean Song envied the scale of their operations and could only look on in awe. Fellow Taoist. He turned to look at the Sphinx. He paused. I never asked your name. He realized before he could ask the actual question he wanted. The Sphinx tilted its head. My name is ancient and bestowed by my mother from the ancient traditions. There are no characters in your language that can convey it, so you can just use my Western name. Ocean Song's eyes widened. It sounded like his name has a lot of weight. As expected of an ancient and honorable species such as the Egyptian Sphinx clan. You can call me Craig. Oh. Why do you sound disappointed? No reason. Ocean Song pouted. What should this one expect from the Queen mentioned? Have you ever seen Harry Potter? He asked. Yes. Ocean Song tilted his head. I love Harry Potter. Lyra blurted out happily. Ocean Song smiled and patted her head. Imagine Dolores Umbridge except, less pink and more muscles. And a harem of not-so-consensual men. Ocean Song found that particular description rather ominous. Sphinx, the Queen will be seeing you now. The secretary spoke up, not even bothering to address him by name or anything polite. Craig, the Sphinx stood up and barely batted an eye at the impoliteness. Come on, let's get this over with. Line break. They were led through the hallways of the office building portion, passing quite a few figures, not all of them even Amazon or human. Ocean Song wondered if he should call it progressive that there were monsters wearing suits and doing office work. But they also had collars and chains, so he withheld his opinion for now. The secretary knocked on the door that had the big CEO letters carved into it, letting everyone know who it belonged to. She didn't wait for a response as she opened it up and led them inside. Now, Ocean Song understood what Craig meant by muscles. If Amazons were already large and muscular, she was like a bodybuilder in comparison. In fact, Ocean Song was fairly sure that her arms were bigger than his thighs. She sat at a desk with her back to several large windows that overlooked the warehouse below, as if to keep an eye on the workers. Oh, you must be one of those sphinxes from that quaint little gas station out of town. The Queen spoke up, and her fake politeness and fake sincerity were palpable. Yes. This is the third time we've met. Craig said dryly. Oh, I'm so sorry, you all just look the same to me. I couldn't tell. She put a hand over her chest. And who's this? She looked at Ocean Song and Lyra. Greetings, great Amazon Queen. Ocean Song began quickly. This lowly Cyclops is Ocean Song, child of Poseidon. I have long heard the revered name of the Amazon sect and wished to accompany my friend to pay respects to such a vaunted figure. This one also is the sect master of my own little corner, and I perhaps wished to seek advice on how to expand and operate with such prestige and skill as you have. Craig turned to look at him strangely, and even the Amazonian queen sort of just blinked a few times, processing what he had to say. And this is Lyra, daughter of Hecate, my ward. Ocean Song added with a smile. Lyra gave a little wave from behind him. The queen fixed her posture, regaining her earlier air of authority. I am Queen Hypsilia. Ocean Song clasped his hands and bowed. Greetings, Queen Hypsilia, head of the Amazon sect. Right. The Sphinx continued. Anyways, my mother should have sent a letter. The queen tapped her cheek. Oh yes, I received some scribbled parchment. Something about some distributors backing out of contracts or something. Several of our distributors went out of business suddenly. The Sphinx's lips thinned. I'm so sorry to hear that, and what would you like me to do about it? She held that fake sympathetic smile that contrasted oddly with her stature. We were wondering what happened, because they all said the same thing. They said that you all shut them down. Oh yes, now I remember. She gracefully interlocked her fingers, putting her elbows on her desk. They broke some rules, unfortunately. What rules? The rule is that we don't allow any competition. She gave her faux smile again. That makes sense. Ocean Song nodded. The Sphinx's jaw snapped shut, and it shot Ocean Song a strange look. Even the queen was surprised by his response, clearly expecting something else. As the dominant sect in the area, it's proper for all the lesser sects to either bow their heads or enter under your umbrella. Ocean Song explained. It was just obvious. I'm sorry, what are you here for exactly? The queen looked at him again, now utterly confused about his presence, even more than before. This lowly Cyclops would merely like to request the wisdom of the great queen of Amazon. This one small sect can't compare to your vaunted organization, and I wouldn't be against advice. He smiled. She sort of registered his words properly this time. I feel like I've heard your name somewhere. Ahem. The Sphinx cleared its throat. Perhaps we could reach an agreement. Yes, I know what you want. She made a dismissive hand motion before rummaging through her drawers. Here are the new contracts if you want to resume those channels under our control. She slid the paper across the table. The Sphinx picked it up, looked it over, and his face slowly changed. This is ridiculous. This is more than 10 times the price we were paying before. Oh, I'm so sorry you don't like the terms. I hope you find what you're looking for by taking your business elsewhere. Oh, wait, it seems that there are no other competitors in the surrounding states. The Sphinx looked at Ocean Song. Are you taking notes? Yes. Ocean Song nodded, having taken out a notepad and a pen. Lyra, pay attention, this is how a sect leader handles business matters. Okay, Mr. Ocean. Lyra followed his lead despite having no idea what was happening. Fine, I'll take this to my mother. The Sphinx grumbled, grabbing the papers off the desk. Wonderful. The queen smiled, politely, again. Now, how can I help you? She gave Ocean Song an upside-down look. Ocean Song pinged something strange in her look but pushed that to the side. This one would like to request your wisdom if you have time, great queen. As I said, I run a humble sect with only a handful of members. I wish to compare notes and see where I can improve. The queen, while confused by his choice of words, somewhat understood what he was talking about. So, you want to know how to expand your company. She leaned back. The most important thing to establish is an end goal. An end goal. Ocean Song rubbed his chin. I believe I have one that qualifies, but may I hear the splendid goal of your great Amazon sect? World domination. The queen stated without an ounce of hesitation. What? The Sphinx was the first to react. Did I stutter? The queen looked at him. A worthy goal. Ocean Song nodded. What? The Sphinx looked at Ocean Song this time. Of course, it's the goal of many great sects to cover the world with their hands to prove their Tao. Ocean Song thought nothing strange of her goals. How? What? Why? The Sphinx was at a loss for words. You run a shipping company. How does that equate to world domination? I fail to see the issue. The queen responded. I agree, it seems pretty obvious. Ocean Song nodded. The Sphinx's mouth hung open. It makes no sense. Ocean Song and the queen shared a look. Would you like to handle this one, great queen, or would you like me to? Oh, by all means. She smiled a bit more genuinely towards him. Ocean Song cleared his throat. But by controlling the distribution of goods, you control commerce. Supply and demand becomes what you will it to be. Medicine, food, weapons, you decide who gets what. Thus, you can decide who lives and who dies, truly dominating the world. The Sphinx sat there speechless, wanting to say how ridiculous that is, but also, he realized, that it sounded logical. You understand. The Queen looked at Ocean Song with a newfound expression. You're not just a handsome face, are you? Ocean Song preened at the praise. Of course, as a jade beauty, being complimented on his looks should be a normal occurrence. She leaned in, her smile no longer looking fake. Tell me about your little startup. Oh, it's just a small mountain sect with a handful of other members. I decided to choose quality over quantity. I've only just started instructing my members on learning their supporting professions to help pay for their cultivation resources. Unfortunately, our business ventures are limited to Camp Halfblood. Like a jolt through the Queen's body, she jerked up straighter in her seat. Come again. Yes. About which part? You said you have business with Camp Halfblood. That is correct. Ocean Song nodded. How? Her eyes widened. I've been trying to penetrate that market for years, but I could never get a foot in the door. Ocean Song just shrugged. I had someone put up a magical bulletin board where they could place commissions that we would receive at my sect. Quote. The Queen slowly and silently stood up, her face hardened. I've decided then. Decided what? Ocean Song tilted his head. I'll make you my 14th husband. She said directly, as if there were no room for arguments. Pardon. Well, I suppose I can dismiss numbers 14, they can't seem to handle things anymore. She harumphed. But I'm sure a handsome, strong man like you won't have any problem there. Ocean Song felt another strange twinge go down his spine. I believe there is a misunderstanding here, Great Queen. Don't worry, I won't destroy whatever small business you have going, you can keep running that cute thing. I just want your connections, maybe I can promote you to a manager role if you prove committed. She licked her lips a little, giving him another once over. Ocean Song cleared his throat. Your forwardness is flattering, but I must decline. This one already has someone in my heart. Oh, it's not a problem. She responded, and Ocean Song was about to say something, but she opened her drawer and pulled out a writing crop. Several of my husbands said the same thing. But after a few days, they never brought it up again. Ocean Song was many things. Most important right now was that he was a jade beauty. And as a jade beauty, he realized he was in danger. Thus, he took the most proper course of action available to him. Line break. Why did I get caught up in this? The Sphinx roared, barreling through a few Amazons who were blocking the way. There was much shouting, chaos, arrows, and swords. Truly, their queen does not possess grace in rejection. Ocean Song, carrying Lyra under his left arm, used his right to draw his sword and deflect several arrows. You yelled, "Begone," thought, and kicked her out the window of her office. I regret nothing. Ocean Song returned. My mom is going to be pissed. He whined. Then allow me to teach you the sacred and ancient rules of fighting within enemy territory. He swung his sword upwards, the warehouse shook, and an overhead beam fell down, blocking the path of several Amazons that were charging at them. Lyra, listen closely, I shall bestow upon you the wisdom of the ancients. He reached over and grabbed a box, he didn't know what was in it, but he stuffed it into his storage pouch. Looting is acceptable if the owners are bad people. He nodded to himself. Can I have that? Lyra pointed at a box with a picture of a big purple bear on it, some type of doll or toy. Of course you can. Ocean Song smiled, grabbing it and stuffing it into his bag along with everything else he could get his hands on. The Sphinx froze in place, despite an arrow whizzing past his head. He then looked to the side, there was a crate full of boxes of the newest cell phones. He lifted it up over his head and ran towards the exit. There wasn't much the Amazons could do in the chaos. Their queen, she wobbled to her feet, rubbing her head after the abrupt fall out her office window, a few stories down into the warehouse that it overlooked. Light was coming in through some holes in the ceiling. There were now parts of the warehouse on fire. And she could see them quite literally stealing pallets of goods as they ran towards the exit. Get me all the information we have on them, I want everything. She hissed to her subordinates, who quickly began to move on her orders. Line break. The Amazon queen sat back at her desk, glass scattered on her office floor. She could hear the shouting and movements down below now that her full-sized back window was shattered. She had several neat stacks of documents as she went over them. Pictures of Ocean Song, Lyra, and even the Sphinx. She didn't care much about the Sphinx, tossing those to the side. Despite her annoyance, she didn't want to start a fight with their ancient mother, when they weren't actually enemies. That ancient Sphinx wasn't something to mess with lightly. The documents about Ocean Song, all the sightings in the past days, the bus he rode in on, and the routes he was taking out of the city, his destinations, all of it. Of course, she now knew who he was, but that didn't dissuade her one bit. She picked up her phone and dialed a very specific number. It took a moment, but the person on the other end picked up. Dottie. The queen immediately whined into the phone. What's wrong, baby girl? A gruff voice answered, and it was none other than Ares, the god of war. Some stupid man rejected me, then he attacked me and destroyed my business. It was a stark contrast to her usual demeanor, but she knew how to get her father bent around her finger. What's his name? Where is he? I'll go teach him a lesson. It's that stupid Cyclops that's been popular. Oh, that one. Ares sounded interested. He dared to hurt my little girl. I'll go beat him up. Where's he at, sweetheart? He's taking a bus west. His destination is New York. He just left my city. Where were you again? Wait, I remember. He should be coming right to me then if he's taking Route 50. I'm also waiting for one of Barnacle Brain's other brats here, so this works out perfectly. Don't worry, Daddy will teach him a lesson for you. She happily hung up the phone, and her sweet one disappeared. She let out a scoff and picked up the picture of Ocean Song. Now, she just needed to find where his small little business, or whatever, was located. One way or another, she was going to get him under her. Chapter 49. Camp Halfblood was quiet. Far quieter than it had been in centuries. Perhaps 80% of the demigods that usually stayed in camp were now gone. Mobilized and taking treks across the country on a quest with no real goal in mind. Hopeful that the missing items of the gods could be found. Even the gods didn't have a clear direction for them other than to travel west. The idea is that eventually fate will lead to the quest being settled, and with more demigods participating, there was a higher likelihood of it being completed. Quests were usually interlinked heavily with fate. There were two primary types of quests. Those ordained by fate and delivered through prophecy, and those simply created by a god because they needed something done and couldn't do it themselves. Despite not having a proper prophecy to work with, this was most certainly a quest with a heavy fate attached to it. The gods, other than Apollo of course, didn't need to have domains connected to fate or prophecy to at least feel and understand that much. They were adept at understanding the flow of the world. A prophecy was weighty, but sometimes words unspoken also carried with them a certain heaviness. It wasn't merely because of Hera's golden apple tree either. That certainly lit a fire under their proverbial butts, but it was just one factor. Too much happened in too short of a time frame. Zeus's lightning bolt was stolen, which started everything. That alone would have started a quest, most likely dictated by fate. But then, several more incidents. Not the least of which was the other pantheons coming over and giving them a black eye. They hadn't willingly swallowed that indignation, but there wasn't much they could do at the moment. And now, Hera's tree. It also made the gods wary, like something was just simmering beneath the surface, something much worse. Thus, the demigods were deployed in numbers that hadn't been seen in centuries. Which made it much easier for someone to sneak inside. No one noticed the little black raven hopping across the ground between cabins. It expertly dodged any eyes, avoiding the perception of the goddess of the hearth, who sat at the center of camp. And even the centaur, who would have without a doubt noticed its peculiarities had it been caught. The bird, without being seen, approached the oddly out-of-place bulletin board set up and quickly charged at it, slapping a piece of paper onto its surface and shooting off into the sky before anyone could notice. Far away, in another realm, the king of gods of the north smiled. However, his face was pale, and sweat poured down his brow, and his legs wobbled slightly as he found a seat and nearly collapsed into it with deep breaths. That brat owes me big time for this. Odin grumbled. He had paid a price for interfering with another pantheon's prophecy. It wasn't a simple matter of finding an opening to throw a wrench into the plans of the fates, but he directly stuck his hands into the actual mechanisms of the world with his latest stunt. Father, I got the. Thor entered the room where his father stayed, and he immediately saw the condition of the Allfather. Father, what happened? Are you harmed? Odin let out a laugh. Just made my last move, it took a bit out of me. Don't worry about it. Thor furrowed his brow. Our new friends settled in, I quite like them. I believe they will fit in with us very well. Odin nodded. Make sure you don't visit them again for a while. Yes, yes. You told me already, you don't want Loki to find out. Thor just nodded. Father, you look very unwell. What did you do? Odin grinned widely despite his pale complexion. I did what the kids these days call a pro gamer move. Quote. Father, have you been playing the video games again? You know how your blood pressure gets when you play with the mortals. Bah. Odin harumphed. I will master these confounded things one day, and then we'll see who is having relations with whose mother. Line break. Up on top of the mountain of the insert name here sect, a Cyclops swung his sword as he had been practicing for days now. It wasn't Ocean Song, but his junior brother, Tyson. Tyson was oddly talented, mostly because he didn't have any distractions. He was young, basically a child, despite his size and technically being an adult due to being a monster. He was told to practice, so he practiced without a second thought. Though, that wasn't to say he was unhappy. Quite the opposite, Tyson was the happiest he had ever been. He had a home, he had a family, and he could do fun things like make stuff, eat good food, and play with everyone. After he was finished, he began on his chores. Though, ironically, Ocean Song forgot the important part of assigning sect members chores, and Tyson had been doing them all on his own. He started with sweeping the courtyard as he does every day, making sure his home stays nice and clean. It was only when he was nearly finished that he looked at the glowing bulletin board, and it caught his eye. He knew what it was, but he hadn't been on any commissions yet. Ocean Song said to wait until there was one suited for him. Of course, Ocean Song meant something crafting related, knowing that his junior brother was still rather naive about the world. But Tyson took that differently. That's why his expression suddenly changed, and he smiled brightly, quickly grabbing the paper off the board and running back into the main buildings. Miss Mel, he shouted, the paper flapping in the wind between his fingers. Tyson. Mel, also known as the goddess Hel, peeked out from the kitchen doors. Are you okay, dear? Bahu. Nessie also peeked out from behind her. Nessie had been teaching her how to cook, and Hel had taken over being the cook for everyone, with help from Nessie. Strangely, she enjoyed doing such a menial task. Tyson seemed to remember something else, and he started fidgeting in his pockets. Oh, I got something I made. He finally found it in a side pocket of his robes. I made this for you, Miss Mel. He smiled, holding up a carefully sculpted bird, specifically a raven. It was very lifelike, despite it being small enough to fit into a normal person's hand. Ah, you're such a sweetheart. Thank you, Tyson. He happily accepted it. If it were anyone else, she would have thought they were flirting with her, but with how innocent and genuine Tyson was, she knew he was just being sweet. She reached up, gently patting him on the head. To her, him being a Cyclops wasn't even a thought. She was a Jotun even if she was a goddess. A Cyclops. That was basically a different type of Jotun as far as she was concerned. She took a look at her new bird figurine and realized it looked very much like a certain god's pet raven. Her lips thinned slightly, but she decided against saying anything. Dinner will be done soon. She told him. Do you want to wait, or do you want me to call you when it's ready? For Hel, living here was rather soothing. No responsibilities, no other gods to bother her, which didn't really happen either, but mostly, she could just run away from her troubles back home for a while. Even if everyone here was strange, she felt like she fit in rather easily. Wait, I forgot, I got this. Tyson quickly remembered the reason he originally came. Look, I got a job. Mel furrowed her brow. She too was familiar with the quirks of the sect. She was aware that the others often went out to do jobs. In fact, Medusa and Daedalus were out right now and wouldn't be back for a bit because they were working. She also knew that Tyson was basically a child, so she was a tad concerned about him going out. It's perfect for me, just like brother said. See, it even says one Cyclops, right here. Hel picked up the paper and read it. It was a vague request for help, with a strict requirement of needing a Cyclops. It included a very specific location way out in the west, at a very specific time. Hel almost tore it up on the spot. She felt like anyone would be able to see the obvious strangeness of this kind of request. It all but had a red flag attached to it, waving around. Quote. Are you sure? Mel looked up at him. Yes, just like brother said, it's just for me. Tyson nodded happily. But how do I get to Denver? He looked at the paper still in Hel's hands, doing his best to pronounce it. Bahu. Nessie threw her head up and let out a happy noise. You'll take me. Thank you, Nessie. Tyson preened happily. Let's go. I can't wait to come back and tell everyone I did a job too. Tyson hopped onto Nessie's back, and Hell watched as the strange dinosaur creature began to scoot across the ground and out the door with a Cyclops on her back. Hell let out an exasperated sigh, then went back to making dinner. For her, after only being here for days at this point, this wasn't even the strangest thing she'd seen. Line break. Turn, turn, turn. I see it. Luke shouted back as Annabeth braced herself. The car jerked, and Percy smacked his head against the side of the car while Malcolm did his best to keep himself from thrashing around. There were a bunch of bikers with weapons attacking their car. They all wore leather jackets and full-face bike helmets, so you couldn't see their faces. Their weapons weren't normal either. They were wielding Greek weapons, swords, spears, bows, that sort of thing. The car swerved several times as one of the bikers stabbed his blade right through the side window next to Luke, who nearly got stabbed. Malcolm rolled down the window, picked up his bow, and fired an arrow, only for one of the bikers to deflect it rather easily. Is this normal in this place? Percy asked, ducking down because on the other side, one of the many bikers stuck a spear through the window. He quickly grabbed it from inside, yanking it forward, making the biker, who was riding up next to the car, stutter and swerve, falling over and hitting the ground hard as his body disappeared in the rearview mirror. Why would you think this is normal? Annabeth shouted. Smelly Gabe always went on about how liberal cities like Denver have higher crime rates and riots. This is not the time. Luke yelled. Road spikes. Malcolm shouted, pointing ahead. There were several leather-wearing, helmet-wearing guys on the sides of the road further ahead, and as they got close, they saw road spikes that they had set up ahead. Hold on. Luke shouted, twisting the car wheel as hard as he could without flipping the car while hitting the brake. The back of the car swung outward, knocking a biker off his bike, making him go flying through the air, as he just managed to catch an exit before their car got hit by the road spikes. The others went tumbling around in the back as the car reoriented itself, smoke wafting off parts of the vehicle in the aftermath of the dangerous maneuver. They're still on us. Percy looked back. Do we have anything? Bombs. Why would we have bombs? Annabeth again shouted back. Because they would be helpful. Here, use this. Malcolm handed Percy bottles of water, and his eyes lit up. What's that going to do? Annabeth didn't get to finish because Percy threw one out the window. Harmless enough, two bikers, one driving the bike, the other on the back seat. The one on the back seat used his sword to swat it away, cutting it as it passed. Percy held his hand out, clenching it, and the water sprang out. Like a snake, it conglomerated midair and shot up the helmet of the one steering the bike. He clearly got startled, choked, and let go of the handles. The bike, going at high speed, wobbled ever so slightly before it lost its traction and turned aggressively, causing the two bikers to be flung off their bike. I take it back. Annabeth blinked. Percy threw out a few more water bottles, taking out several more bikers in the process, but there were still dozens, and even more seemingly joining up the longer they drove. Luke, watch out. Annabeth shouted. Out of the corner of his eye, Luke saw a couple of those same guys on a bike swerve over. One of them had a spiked mace and swung it at the windshield of the car, nearly destroying it, but spiderweb cracks littered it, making it almost impossible to see out. Without the chance to even give a warning, they crashed. It was hard for any four of them to say they understood what happened. The airbags shot out, and they slammed forward at such force and speeds that none of them could think coherently in the moment. Despite being demigods, they were still young. This kind of hit was enough to take them out of commission, even if it didn't kill them. The car was unmoving, steam wafted off it, and smoke began to billow from the engine. Several of the bikers came to a stop around the car, several more quickly followed. They unceremoniously parked their bikes, got up, and tore the doors off the car and pulled them out. Surprisingly, they didn't harm the kids. Instead, they threw them over the backs of their own bikes and rode off with the same casualness, like they hadn't just been on a high-speed chase while swinging around medieval weapons. Malcolm was the first to regain consciousness. But even then, his head rocked back and forth, his vision was blurry, and he had trouble even thinking straight. He felt the wind hitting his face and the feeling of vibrations as the bike rode away with him on it. It didn't seem like they rode far before coming to a stop again. The next thing he knew, he was flung over the shoulder of some nameless goon along with the others. He could see they were in some sort of park. He wasn't quite sure and didn't have the mental capacity to make any distinctions. Instead, He reached for the sword sheathed at the side of the goon carrying him, pulled it free from its sheath, and stabbed him in the back. The goon fell to the ground without so much as a scream, along with Malcolm, who felt a jolt of pain go through his body. Ho! You got a bit of a bite to you, don't you, kid? Not something I'd expect from one of my sister's brats. Malcolm barely saw who spoke, it was blurry, and he was still disoriented. He just grabbed the sword and swung it in long arcs around him haphazardly. Alright, that's just annoying. Malcolm felt something touch his forehead, like he had been flicked. He fell over again, but his blurry vision and twisted world around him snapped back into focus. He then looked up to see who was there. A similar black leather jacket and sunglasses, but the face is visible. He also felt a strange bloodlust. He could guess who it was. Ares, the god of war. Let's get the other brats up on their feet. He turned around to the other demigods who had been thrown onto the ground near Malcolm, and he either kicked them, more of a nudge, or flicked their heads. Which seemed to help them surprisingly. I feel like I was just in a car crash. Percy groaned. Because we were, you seaweed brain. Annabeth groaned too, slowly climbing to her feet. Guys, Luke grabbed their attention, and the others looked around them too. The same bikers that had assaulted them, there were easily over 100 around them in a circle, like a wall that stopped them from running away. Great, you're all awake. Nice to meet you brats, I'm Ares, god of war. Yada yada, worship me, bow before me, blah blah. He snapped his fingers, and one of the biker henchmen ran over and placed a chair down for him to sit on. Ares spun the chair around, sitting in it backwards as he played with a small but sharp knife. Let's see, two of my sister's brats. He pointed the dagger at Annabeth and Malcolm. One of Hermes's brats, but we've already met, haven't we? He grinned a bit. And lastly, we have one of Barnacle-Beard's bastards. Sup? Percy waved. Annabeth smacked his shoulder. Percy, do not disrespect the god sitting in front of us. She hissed. Well, I can't say that Athena's brats aren't entirely stupid. Ares nodded to himself, then he flicked forwards at the air. Percy's eyes widened, and something invisible smacked him right in the chest, like a gut punch, and he fell to his knees, wheezing. The girl's right, brat. Don't disrespect the gods, know your place. Ares said coldly, watching Percy gasping for air. I'd kill for less, you know. If I didn't actually need you, I'd have my boys dump you in the nearest dumpster after cutting off all your limbs. We thank you for your mercy, god of war. Annabeth bowed her head, being very polite in her words. Ares snorted disdainfully but didn't otherwise give her more trouble. Annabeth swallowed. May I ask if you require anything of us? Ares rolled his eyes. No, I just dragged your unconscious asses here because that's my hobby. What do you think? Annabeth did her best not to react negatively. We'd be happy to assist you in anything you need, sir. Ares's eyes lit up. Oh, that's perfect. He looked around. Did you hear that, everyone? The little brat is going to help. Well, I just so happen to have something that needs to be done. Since you're so willing to help here. Ares tossed a bag onto the ground at her feet. What is? That bag holds Pop's lightning bolt and Uncle's helm of darkness. Be a dear and hold onto that for me, will you? Ares said with clear snark. What? Ares rolled his eyes and sat back down with a sigh. Right, you're probably confused. Let me elaborate. You see, I need a patsy to hold onto the stolen goods while I wipe my hands of this whole mess. I intended to let things play out and get a nice three-way war between Pop and my uncles, you know how it goes. But someone stole Mom's damn tree, and now I'm up shit creek without a paddle. Everything went sideways, and I have to toss the goods, you hear me? You want us to take the blame. Malcolm spoke up. Bingo. Ares snapped his fingers, pointing at him. One of Athena's brats is smart at least. And bonus, I chose your group because maybe I can salvage everything anyways. Barnacle-Beard's bastard over there gets caught with this stuff. Maybe a war happens anyways. Win-win, am I right? He let out a chuckle. Why would we agree to that? Percy gasped, standing back up. Good question. Ares nodded. Your consent isn't needed. He smiled. Any more questions? Quote. Zeus, I found your lightning bolt. Percy spoke up, looking at the sky. There was a beat of silence as everyone looked at him. Well, quick thinking if nothing else. But do you really think that'd work? Ares looked at him incredulously. That's the literal first thing I blocked when bringing you lot here. Sorry kiddo, no other gods will hear, see, or know what's going on right here. I don't know why Pops put that big-ass storm up over the country, but even he won't notice us right under his nose like this. Ares smirked. He loved seeing their expression turn from hopeful to realization. And just like that, you know your place. So, let's save all the hassle and, Ares paused because the kids were staring at something. Confusion arose in him as he followed their gaze, turning his head. He felt warm breath against his face. What the fuck? Bahu. Ares fell out of his chair as Nessie bellowed in his face. What? Who are you? How did you get here? Ares was quickly back on his feet, confused, bewildered, and confused some more. Tyson peeked out from Nessie, stepping off her back. Hello. My name is Tyson, and I'm here because I got this job. Who was it that asked for help? What? Ares blinked. Am I at the right place? It says this park, at this time. Tyson looked around hopeful. Who asked for help? The demigods looked at each other. Percy raised his hand. We did. What did they have to lose by saying yes here? Tyson's eyes lit up. Hello, I'm Tyson. I'm here to help you. There was a moment of stunned silence. Even Ares blinked several times, slowly lowering his sunglasses as he stared at the cheerful, one-eyed giant standing next to a dinosaur. Quote. What in Tartarus is this Saturday morning bullshit? Ares muttered. Percy, still half in shock, leaned over to Annabeth. Did we just get rescued by a Cyclops, on a dinosaur? Percy, that's not a dinosaur. Hey Cyclops, bro. They could clearly tell that Tyson was a Cyclops. Is that a dinosaur? Tyson tilted his head. No. See. Annabeth said smugly. Nessie is the Loch Ness monster. Tyson corrected. What? Line break. Tyson to the rescue, or something. If you want to read one chapter ahead or support me, visit my page AStoryForOne. I also have a boosty if you can't use the above under the same name.